I will call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging we are in Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Neil Harton. I'm chairing today's panel. With me is Brent McIntyre to my left and Maurice Harrian to my far left. The assessor is Jonathan Spacek, and recording secretary is Bethany Rokel. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that would be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. We will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. So, Don, can you do the swearing in?
Please state your full name.
Jonathan Spacek.
And you swear therein to represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
Thank you. Please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
And you swear therein to represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first property on today's agenda is 111 Lombard, and the issue is assessed value, so you may begin.
All right, thank you very much. You're looking at roll number 1306068500, address 111 Lombard. This is between Waterfront and Rory. You can look on page 2 to see some pictures of this location. The 2020 assessed value is $25,190,000. This is a 6-story office building, the original Bricks Furniture building. It was originally built in 1903, and it went through a renovation around 2005. So they built an infill in the middle of it, as you can see from my page 2, or my page 3 shows it better from the back. You can see where they kind of installed the infill portion of this building with some brand new offices, and then they did a kind of a full renovation of the building. So that's where we get the effective years of 2013 for our what we have 2 buildings on here, even though it's one big building. So we have built in 1903, built in 2005 for the addition, with a effective year of 2013 on this. We have a gross floor area of 154,004 square feet, and we have a leasable area of 124,012 square feet. If you turn to my page 2, point out right where the building is. It's just 3 blocks off of Waterfront, and it is about a block and a half from Portage in Maine. You have Richardson building there, access to the underground, very close to Portage in Maine and close to our central downtown district. Page 2, also at the bottom, you can see the front of this building. Page 3, you see a view from Waterfront and McDermott looking at the building, and then my bottom picture is just a picture from McDermott Avenue looking through the parking lot that's beside the building. Page 4 just shows our request for information has been complied with for this property. We always receive mailers from them. There was an old sale in 2008. Subject leases are gross or semi-gross on this property, and I have them on page 13. We'll get to them after. So page 5 is the income workup for this property. We have a single income stream on this property. It is under our characteristics of OFC. So I'll try to save the question from Mr. Newman, but I'm sure he'll ask it anyways. This is an OFC building. For office buildings downtown, we have different types of office buildings. So there's OFA, Portage and Main, 220 Portage. You're aware of OFA flagship buildings are biggest, nicest offices downtown. Then we have OFB classification, OFC, OFD. These properties have different characteristics. A different assessor or a different appraiser may see an OFB more as an OFC. Some appraisers may see an OFC and argue it's an OFB, OFA to OFB, these kind of, they're subjective. OFBs often have over 100,000 square feet in space. They have, more amenities than an OFC. They're most often in the downtown area, but there are suburban OFBs, OFCs, and OFSs. This building is an OFC. When it was put in, it was classified as an OFC due to age of it, due to size of it, due to location. The rents in place for this property, we have 124,000 square feet of space close to downtown in Portage and Main. The market workup for this building works out to $16.99 a square foot. I've used OFB comparables for this property, so I will bring you to those after I work with this income, but I'm just trying to a little ahead of time explain why we have this classified as an OFC, but it's an interesting case where it's originally built in 1909, but it's had full renovations, brought it up to a 2013 effective age. So it's nicer office space in an older frame of a building, if that makes sense. We have 124,000 square feet in this building, blended rate of $16.99. So the OFC, I'll just say now as well, we have our parameters for an OFC. So when you look at the vacancy, we're at 10.5%. That will change slightly with an OFB. Our expenses at 2% will stay the same. Shortfall slightly changes. So an OFC, you have a $850 shortfall. OFB allows a higher shortfall at $11. Again, I am showing you the OFC workup here, and I'm defending the OFC value, just trying to explain ahead of time the difference between OFB and an OFC, as I'm sure it'll come up. But so this property, continuing from the potential rent, if we go down to our vacancy loss, we allow a 10.5% vacancy loss on this building, which brings you down to an effective gross income. And then from there, we're at the 2% expenses. So this I will quickly pivot away and explain our, as I'm sure the panel will have heard, but I'll quickly go through, I've included everybody with an addenda here in this workup. Just want to make sure it's a small 6-page addenda. There we go, so I'll just reference it very quickly, but we've always had a 5% in the past, a 5% management expense, and then a 2% non-recoverable expense. Every assessment as per my page, it's page 1 of my workup, if you actually turn this page, the 3rd page, but it's 2020 a fresh look. Not sure if you've heard this from an assessor, but I'll just quickly point out that for the 2020 assessment, every 2 years we do a reassessment. It's a fresh look or a fresh assessment. We have to, as a department, analyze the market and see how these properties are, how owners are receiving income of the property, what kind of expenses they have, and how we need to best assess these properties to show what they're, to get a value of how they're actually performing. We have found through this 2020 assessment that the 2% non-recoverable was a fair and equitable way to get the expenses for these owners, because the rents we were using were net rents, net of management. That 5% was consistently being recovered by the owners, and we did not need to remove that 5% again. So again, I know we've heard these arguments. If you have any questions, you can ask me again, but that is what my fresh look is, what the page 1 showing the fresh look there is going over. And then if we go back to my income approach, after the 2% expenses, we have a shortfall of $850 per square foot. So we are recognizing that vacant space, the 10.5% of vacant space in this building requires an allowance to hold while it is vacant. So we're saying 10.5% on average is vacant in this building, and we're giving the owner $850 off per square foot in expenses. So that's covering some of those non-recoverable expenses that the owner will have when that space is vacant in this building. Moving down from that, that gives us our NOI on this building, and then we have a capitalization rate of 6.9% for this OFC. This works out to that total value of $25,189,000, which is a total of $25,198,000 for this assessment for 2020. If you turn to page 6, These are some of the comparables that I've put together to show the OFB market in Winnipeg. I believe this building is more comparable to an OFB than an OFC. We have a wide range of buildings with 71 comparables total that work out to an average of $14.96 a square foot, $13.99 weighted average, and a $14 median. So if you look at the effective years of most of these buildings, most OFB, from what I've seen in downtown Winnipeg, are built, in the 1970s, ranging from 1970 to 1980. That's where the core of these downtown buildings are built. Some are renovated, some are not. It's a wide range of buildings. Our building was built in 1903, but completely renovated and had an add-on to, increase its effective age. It's a building that's garnering higher rents, and I believe it's more comparable to OFBs on this list compared to OFCs. So our building is at $16.99 blended average, and the comparables I've brought in has an average or a median of $14, but again, this is a wide range of OFBs built in the 1970s. Page 8 is the total income work of this property. There's one stream, so nothing's changed. And page 9 is our capitalization rate. So we are at 6.9%. I will just point out, using our chart we bring into all of the appeals here this cycle, that downtown OFB is at 6.75% for the city of Winnipeg across the board. We're at 6.9% on this building. All of our city of Winnipeg OFBs are 6.75%. The third parties have a range of, so if you look at Collier's, the OFBs range from 6.25 to 7.25, 6.5 to 7, and 6.25 to 6.75. We are within range at that 6.9 for our cap rate we're using on this building, and that's the range that the third parties are showing for OFBs. If you go to OFSs, which is the third row down on our property type office at the top, it's just under OFB. There's a range of OFSs from 5.5 to 9.05. If you take out the outliers of those, the 20th percent and the 80th percent outliers, you tighten that range to 6.2 to 7.3. Again, I'm not trying to say this is an OFS, but those are our ranges for OFSs versus OFBs this cycle. We do not have a separate column for OFCs, but what I've included in our addenda, and we're including with all of our income producing properties now, if you turn to the second page, just past a fresh look, it says capitalization rate evidence. We're just adding in a little extra to show that we have analyzed some cap rates, and so I'm just going to read this here. The following is a sample of actual sales that took place during the reference period. The purpose for showing these individual capitalization rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived capitalization rates. They are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. So I'm just showing he has analyzed sales that happened near the reference, has went through and analyzed the actual NOIs, and we stabilized the income and expenses that were reported to derive our own cap rate. So if you turn to the next page, we have 4 different sections here. The top one is office. So there are 5 office buildings that sold near the reference date and the cap rates that go along with it. It's just a secondary support. I'm not trying to compare our building to these exact ones, but just trying to show we're trying to present some extra capitalization rate evidence to go along with what we're presenting on our chart there. And if we go back to my brief, I'm just gonna ask you to turn to page 11. This is the income and expense mailer that was sent in for the building for the income year of 2017. This property, actually, if you look on the left-hand side, what they're reporting, they've reported a rental income on this property of $2,207,000 approximately. You go down, they've included storage rental income of $22,000, and they also have near the bottom left of the page there's recovery. So it's a semi-gross rent. So some of these rents in the building, they are recovering utilities maintenance recoveries and property tax recoveries from the tenant. So when you add those all up, the owner of this building is receiving a total of $2.9 million. And then he spelled out the expenses in the middle. If you go through the expenses and take the property tax off, the total expenses for the building are $1.2 million. So when you take off what he's reporting as actual income received minus expenses, their reported net operating income is $1.7 million. If you turn to my page 5 quickly, you'll see our net operating income after we remove expenses and vacancy and everything and do our expenses, we're at $1.738 million. So just what I've presented for the market comparables to show rents is also, shown with what the owner is actually reporting for this building. We're very close, our model is very close at coming up to a net operating income that's close to what they're reporting, so it kind of just to show you. And if you look on the right-hand side of the mailer, there's only a 6% vacancy in this building. So if you look at our vacancy of 10.5%, I believe, our model is above on the actual vacancy of this building as well, so. And if you also turn to page 13, you'll just see the different tenants in the building. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenants above ground, and then there's Ira's Deli in the basement, so they have a lower rent in the basement space. But that's the information for the tenants. And then just page 16 onward is some of the pictures from some of the renovations that were done in the building and some of the space within the building when there was an inspection done after the construction in 2014. You can take a look at those to see the kind of finish of the office space. And I believe I've covered everything on that one. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Is that it?
I believe that's it.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes. And maybe what I'll do is, I'll start with the 5%, and again, I'll do, because I know you've all heard this before, but I don't think any of you have heard it from me. So I'll ask a few questions of the assessor, but then I'll make my own submission on that issue. Mr. Spasic, as you've noted, so you described it as 5% management in the past. That's no longer there. You indicated that 2% is fair and equitable because the rents are net of management. And by that, I think you're meaning to convey to the panel that the city's view was that the 5% was truly what I'll call property management, as opposed to other types of non-recoverable expenses.
Yes, it's a 5% management fee.
Right.
Yes,
And-
only to property management.
And on the assumption that the leases are net, then there's no need for that recovery or allowance of the expense of the 5% management because it's being recovered from the tenants.
Absolutely.
Okay. As you noted, this building has got gross and semi-gross leases.
Yes.
So you're not gonna get that 5% recovery in this building, right?
If you're going to recover it, it's going to be in with something, like they often will, I don't know, because it's not filled out perfectly, you can often recover management within CAM or within other rates, but
Okay.
it could be recovered within the utilities, we don't know exactly.
So, but in a general sense, the city accepts the concept that property owners have certain types of expenses they cannot recover from anyone,
Absolutely.
conceptually.
Yes,
And in the city's mind, that's adequately reflected in the 2% allowance.
yes,
One of the things that I believe the city is of the view should not be allowed as a non-recoverable expense is leasing commissions.
yes, that, for sure.
And the city takes that view, and although you've not presented anything on this, the city takes that view based on some decisions from the municipal board, which the city says create what in appraisal terminology is called a jurisdictional exception.
Yes,
And what that means simply is that the normal appraisal methodology would say deduct non-recoverable expenses from in getting to net operating income. But in Manitoba, the law is different and therefore we don't have to do it.
absolutely, we can follow the
That's
case
the,
law, right? Yeah,
that's the view of the department.
absolutely.
And that's really the essence of the dispute, I think, in many ways now. The department thinks the 2% is enough, and they think it's enough in part because the department is of the view that things like leasing commissions and tenant inducements do not fall within non-recoverable expenses
Yes,
because of decisions.
absolutely.
That's really the nub of what this dispute has come to.
That's where it's the nitty-gritty is, for sure.
Okay. Okay. Those are my questions on that issue. But I will come back to it. So, let's look at your brief then. So as you've noted, this is an OFC. Let me ask you a general question. The city publishes a manual on income-producing properties every year. One part of that is office buildings,
Yes,
correct?
yes,
But in that manual, there's no description of the difference between an OFA, an OFB, an OFC, and an OFD, correct?
Correct.
But I believe you've indicated that this one, because of its age, its size, its location, is a C.
When it was put in as a C, yeah, characteristically it's a C.
Okay. And one of the buildings that was on this docket that was resolved was 93 Lombard, which is immediately adjacent, correct?
93 Lombard, is that in my evidence? Are you asking me about my evidence?
Well, it's in your pictures.
Sorry, what is 93 Lombard? Can you say the question again?
Yes. 93 Lombard is the building immediately adjacent and to the east, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
It's classified as an OFD.
Yes, correct.
Right. It's a turn of the century, turn of the 20th century building,
Yeah.
an old warehouse building that was redone some years ago.
Absolutely.
Right. Why is that one a D and this one a C?
Again, like I said, so our effective year on this building, 2013, when it was put in, the amenities in the building, the finish of the building, the floor plan of the building, was put in characteristically as a C, and then something like 93 Lombard, which is, again, built around the same time, just off memory, not as renovated, not as nice inside, more of a, kind of that smaller portions, a lot more tenants in the building, characteristically more of an OFD, when you have a lot of smaller, a hallway with a bunch of multi-tenant suites, stuff like that is some of the reasons why you can make something an OFD versus an OFC.
All right, so let's come back to my more general question. The manual doesn't describe the differences between the various types of office buildings, correct?
It does not.
But again, you're saying that, as you said earlier, this one, by virtue of its age, its size, its location, is classified as a C.
From my understanding, yes.
All right. So then if we go to your page 5, the model, so let me ask this. The rents that are shown on page 5, are they model-driven rents?
Yes.
Even though this is a Class C, the model is kicking out rents that let's ignore the basement at $4.98 a square foot, but all of the other space, the model is kicking out rents of $16.85 or higher, and a number of them are north of $19, correct?
Correct.
And I gather what the model is doing in part is the smaller the space, the higher the rent.
There's economies of scale to do in our model, so yes, a smaller space will have if it's the same style and, condition as the space, it'll have a higher rent for the smaller space.
And so, and then at page 6 is a set of 71 comparables for OFB buildings.
Yes.
Many of these buildings are connected to the skywalk,
Absolutely.
have underground parking.
Some do, yes.
None of them are in the Exchange District,
None of them are in the Exchange District, no.
where the subject is. And at the end of the day, the average rent for these B buildings is $14.96. And as you noted, the average rent, the blended rent that's being used on this building is $17.
Correct, that's what I said.
All right. And then on page 7, you've got, at the bottom half of the page, you've got some Cushman-Wakefield information,
Yes.
which indicates that for Class C in the Central Business District, the average net rent is $11.45.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then your page 9, your capitalization rate workup. Again, the city doesn't track OFCs, correct?
No.
And the major brokerage firms don't track OFCs either.
No.
Okay. So let's look then, if we could, at page 13, which is the rent roll. And you'll acknowledge that the majority of the space in this building is occupied by government tenants.
Yes,
And is it your experience that government tenant leases are either gross or semi-gross?
most often, yes.
To the point where, for example, changing light bulbs is the responsibility of the landlord, providing janitorial service on a day-by-day basis is the landlord's responsibility.
Yes, depending on the lease in place, there's different requirements.
But the types of things I've mentioned are common in those leases.
They can be in government leases, yes,
Alright.
I'll agree.
And the rent that the landlord is able to generate out of these premises will be impacted by the fact that a variety of these services I just asked you about, the changing of the light bulbs, the repairs, the janitorial, that's all included in the gross rent that the tenant pays.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think those are my questions.
Okay, Maurice, any questions of the assessor?
I have a few. Parking on page 3, looking at the picture, and I see the bottom picture, there's all these cars here parked. Is that part of the premises or not?
No, that's a separate lot.
Separate lot?
No.
Okay. Do we know what parking there is for that building? For subject?
None included from my understanding. From the leases I've looked at, mostly in exchange when they're advertising leases, will help find parking because there is a lot of surface lots and parkade style
Okay.
close by.
Okay, now, we're looking at your comparables on page 6. Yeah, that's a little bit of a little complicated. I saw only one with 120,000 square feet, which is about halfway down, 300 Carlton,
Yeah, 300 Carlton.
but it's a 1911 year built building,
Yep.
so it's an 1150, so which brings me maybe to I don't think it's a question that's out of line, but the sale of the premises was $3 million in 2008. Do we have any idea what was spent to renovate this place?
I didn't add up the permit values, no, I don't have that with me.
You don't, eh? Because there's quite a jump there, but there's a reason for sure.
Yeah, I didn't put any weight on the sale from 2008.
Okay. Okay. Now, back to your non-recoverable expense sampling on page 3 of this document here,
Yes.
okay? Now, trying to make sense of the chart down here,
Yes.
is there anything that's comparable to this one? I don't know if it's a proper question, I'm just trying to, I know I've seen those before, but it's to justify that 2%, I guess.
Yeah, so what this chart is showing is we've had from other, I'll say, evidence presented showing workups of what the non-recoverable expense percentage is for a sampling of 29 buildings. So what we did is we went to those 29 buildings, we looked at the mailers, and we did our best to work back how the non-recoverable expense was filled out. So what we did was on the right side of our chart here is the actual non-recoverable expenses we did, taking a potential gross income, which is taking all the space in the property, applying a net rent to the vacant space, so getting the total potential income, and then we minused the vacancy of the building, took off a shortfall for the building, and then we determined how much in there was actual non-recoverable expenses. We don't include tenant improvements. So we don't include tenant improvements as a non-recoverable. We don't include leasing commissions. And when we worked back the actual non-recoverable expenses, we found a total median of 1.06% over those 29 properties. And as Mr. Newman said before, the big difference in ours and theirs from just a general view is we're not including those things we that have been in case law not considered as non-recoverable expenses. As I said, leasing commissions and tenant improvements are two of the big ones, but theirs included. So that changes that percentage. But when we did ours, what we consider the proper way or the way we're doing it this cycle, we get that 1.06%. So we can't compare it to a building necessarily on here because every building is different. Some buildings have more expenses than the others, but some years will have a higher tenant improvement that could be used by the appellant to change that number. Some don't use, like I said, that potential gross income. They don't, like a lot of the mailers don't fill out that, if they have 10% vacant, they don't fill in that 10% of space with a market rent to show what the building could get, because that's what you have to look at when you're looking at a building for what its non-recoverables are. You can't just look at what it's getting one year, because it might have high expenses one year, it might have low income one year, and that changes the numbers a lot. But when we stabilized it using our method, we came to a 1.06%. So I hope I've explained that well. That's what this page is trying to show.
You referred to case law.
Yes.
I mean, we don't have evidence of that here. What is the, when was that done and what was the result? It's that, could you explain that a little more?
The good news is, Mr. Newman has a 5% presentation where he's gonna go into all the case law for you. And I have a full rebuttal brief for his 5%. So I'll save that if you don't mind for when we're doing this, this next part. It'll go all into it.
Yeah, I'm going from the evidence I'm gonna hear today, so that's.
Oh,
why
and
asking
I'm
those
telling you, it's
questions.
coming. I'm just saying, I'm not gonna butcher it because it's gonna be presented in paper for you.
Okay, I think that's all I have. And you're saying the mailer basically justifies the NOI that you have on the model?
I'm just showing that the mailer they sent in for 2017 income year, the NOI they report is very close to our models.
Okay, thank you.
That's my
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman.
I have no questions.
I'm gonna ask now, maybe I'm ahead of myself, but the case law on tenant inducements is almost what we consider trite right now. I mean, just like you don't have to present Broadway Square to
Yes.
say you can't use post
So you can bring it up anytime.
reference material and Lula Farms to say you can't compare
Yeah.
assessments and all that sort of thing. But those decisions, I mean, I'll put the same question to Mr. Newman when it comes around. Those decisions were in the context of there being a 5% management.
They were in context of how the assessment was done at that time, I agree.
So do you think that would affect that?
I couldn't give you an answer, I don't know.
Okay, well, I'll have that question for you, Mr. Newman, when you get around to it, so you can proceed.
So maybe what I'll do is start with 5%.
Sure.
And as I say, my intention is really to do it once and not do it again. So you got a significant submission from me. But I do want to make an observation, because a number of the buildings that you're dealing with today have gross or semi-gross leases. So that changes everything in terms of what we start looking at, because of course, everything, the whole model and system the city uses is geared to the concept of net leases. But the reality is, many leases are done that are not truly net, and especially when you deal with governments. Governments load a whole variety of expenses into the amount they pay, of the types I addressed with the assessor. And the reason I mentioned that to you, and Mr. Therian, it goes to a question that I think you asked, which was, the mailer justifies the NOI, and that was part of the assessor's submission. But remember, that's only because the face rate in the rent that the tenant is paying, is loaded with expenses that typically would be covered off under a net lease through additional rent, through common area maintenance costs, for example. In this case, and in all cases where you've got a gross or semi-gross lease, but especially in this building where it's government tenants, The janitorial. When somebody comes through this room every night and cleans this building, typically a tenant would pay for that as additional rent. That doesn't happen in this property. The landlord pays for it because Public Works Canada, province of Manitoba say, you got to absorb all these expenses. So let's not forget that a lot of that is being captured in these rates. So let's talk then about the non-recoverable. So if we go to the first page of my submission, and again, I need you to have in mind that the assessor agrees that there are expenses that a landlord cannot recover from tenants under a net lease. If you look at page 2 of my submission, at the top of the page, there's a list of items that frequently fall into this category. And you know, you see the bullet owners repair and maintenance. Just think about structural repairs. Think about a new roof. Think about a new sidewalk. I have used the example of a circumstance I'm familiar with. It's a 5,000 square foot strip mall in suburban Winnipeg, and I'm very familiar with it because of the client. They spent $50,000 recently redoing the parking lot. It was 25 years old, it needed to be redone, $50,000. They spent $23,000 recently redoing the roof. It was 20 years old, needed to be redone. They spent $11,000 recently redoing the sidewalk. It needed to be redone. So, you know, they spent near to $85,000 amongst those items. The gross rent in the place is, by coincidence, $85,000. If the city allows 2% of $85,000 as the expense allowance, that's $1,700 a year. That's the allowance that will be given. And out of that $1,700 a year, theoretically, the landlord is to recover $85,000 of non-recoverable expenses. The math doesn't work. What happens when you have leasing commissions? Typically and frequently they are 5%. 5% of $85,000 would be $4,200. Under the 2% allowance, that's, you know, it's gonna take 2 or 3 years to get that back. So, you know, these are the types of things that occur, and again, the assessor acknowledges that non-recoverables need to be deducted in getting to NOI. The dispute really is about the scope of those non-recoverables. So, what I've done is I want to start turning you through some of my tabs. So tab 1 is excerpts from the appraisal of real estate. And let's remember that the fundamental thing that we do in valuing a property is we look ahead. Valuation is about anticipation. It's about the future stream of income that will be associated with the property. And that future stream of income is impacted by those non-recoverable expenses. Tab 2 deals with different types of operating expenses. If you look at the pages are numbered in the upper right-hand corner, page 21.17, which is the second page in. You can see a listing of utilities, leasing commissions, and I acknowledge, go to the top of the next page, variety of other expenses, and to be crystal clear, we're not talking about the shortfall here. Because the shortfall are the expenses that are typically recoverable from a tenant, as long as you've got a tenant there. The shortfall deals with you don't have a tenant there to pay those expenses, so it's that vacancy that now has to be absorbed by the landlord. That's not what we're talking about here. And what we're talking about here is the expenses that nobody pays. So then let's move on to tab 3. Tab 3 is an item from the Sauder School of Business, University of British Columbia. It's their real estate division. If you look on the first page, it's page 2.8 in the bottom left-hand corner. You've got a heading, leasing and capital costs, non-recoverable expenses. The appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses. The most important are space marketing costs, which includes both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. And let me just pause to observe that this handout that the assessor provided this morning, where they show that, in their view, the median non-recoverable is 1.06%. To be clear, that non-recoverable expense does not include shortfall, and it shouldn't. I've explained that to you previously. But under the city's methodology, that also does not include leasing commissions, because again, they don't treat that as being a non-recoverable expense, and I'll show you that in more detail in a moment. Then we come to tab 4. So, because I've been around a long time, I have things sitting on my bookshelf that I've acquired over the years. One of them is the city's manual from 1994. In this manual, if you go to page 20, the third page in, 20 at the bottom, they then start to talk about non-recoverable expenses. And then they say the following non-recoverable expenses were considered: management, reflects expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from tenants, even with net leases. So that's interesting language, because that's not saying to you, as the assessor says, that the item that they call management was property management expense. Colliers manages a building. Colliers charges the landlord 5% to manage the building. The assessor's theory is that you can recover that from the tenant as part of additional rent. Therefore, you shouldn't get that expense. And in a general sense, I don't quarrel with that if it's truly recoverable. In this building, the semi-gross or gross lease buildings, it's not recoverable, but that's a different story. So, but the point I'm making in showing this to you is that when the department started this process, what they called management was not intended simply to be pure property management fees paid to an outside property manager. It was intended to cover expenses that are not recoverable, and then they gave examples: processing payments and chasing bad debts. And then at the next page, 21 at the top, other, represents expenses not recoverable from tenants, advertising and promotion, professional fees, structural repairs. Those are some more examples. Then, if you go to tab 5, here is the manual from 1998. And if you go to the page that is numbered in the upper right-hand corner, number 4, the second one in, you'll see in the middle of the page, management. And they repeat the same language that was in the 1994 manual. That management includes non-recoverable from the tenant, and examples of these are processing payments and chasing bad debts. And again, the point I'm making to you is, when they were describing the so-called management, they weren't talking about only property management fees. They were talking about whatever was not recoverable from the tenant. Keep turning the pages. We'll come to page 11 in the lower right-hand corner. This is the 2002 manual. Down at the bottom, management expense again. And you see very similar language. Even with net leases, there will be still additional management expenses that are not recoverable from tenants. This is established at 5%. And then the other types of expenses are listed. We continue to turn the page. Page 13 is the cover page of the 2006 manual. Page 14 again shows management at 5% and other expenses at 2%. Tab 6, this is the Saskatchewan Assessing Authority. This is their manual, and the second page in, what it talks about is you need to get to net operating income. Down at the bottom, they talk about unrecovered operating expenses, which is items not recovered from tenants, and then they go on to give a series of examples, legal and audit, over to the next page, structural repairs and repairs, capital in nature, like a roof, like a parking lot resurfacing, the items I mentioned to you in the example I gave you, leasing commissions. So these are all things that need to be appropriately allowed. And then at page 20, figure 5, the table in the middle, it's an example, and I acknowledge that it's an example. It shows the non-recoverable expense as a total of 8%. Ontario, MPAC, tab 7. That's the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation in Ontario. Again, to the same effect. That if you go to page 22, in the lower right-hand corner, the middle paragraph, third paragraph down, however, even with the triple net lease, there are expenses that are not necessarily passed through to the tenant, but are absorbed by the owner. These expenses are non-recoverable, may include marketing, large capital cost, legal and auditing, and they calculate a ratio and they apply it to the different types of properties. And the point I'm making from this simply is that these authorities, these bodies recognize that we have non-recoverable expenses to be taken into account. So, what is the law in Manitoba? Tab 8. All the cases that the assessor points to point back to 2 original cases, which is where it all starts. One of them is this National Trust Company case, which is actually all about 444 St. Mary Avenue in downtown Winnipeg, the Intercity Gas Building as it was once called. And this was a case where the agent for the owner was arguing that because there had been a significant vacancy in the property and inducements were given to the tenants to get them in, those inducements should be deducted from the face rate. So if the face rate was $10, the agent was arguing that don't use $10 in calculating the gross potential income, use $8, because those inducements have a value of $2. And if you look at page 24, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a heading vacancy, and that paragraph talks about chronic vacancy in the building. And then 4 lines from the bottom, Mr. Simmons, and he's the agent, Mr. Simmons' contention is that the cost of those tenant inducements should be applied in reduction of the base rates in the leases. The board has considered this question in the past, in particular in the Richardson building, in order number such and such, where at page 2 the board indicated. We go over to the next page. Considerable evidence was heard concerning the effect on the value of tenant inducements. The respondent ultimately abandoned the position that value should be reduced to reflect tenant inducements. And I'm going to show you the Richardson case in a minute. But again, I want it to be crystal clear to you. What is happening here today, and in all the hearings you've been dealing with through this cycle, the owner's representatives are not saying to you that you should take the face rates, the rental rates used in the gross potential income calculation, and you should reduce those because of some of these non-recoverables. They're not saying that to you. That's what was said in the 444 St. Mary case, but that's not what's being said to you. What's being said to you here is when you calculate your net operating income, as the department agrees, conceptually, there are expenses that are not recoverable, and those need to be removed as a deduction before you get to net operating income. Historically, the assessor now says our 5% was property management fee. I say to you, they may be saying that now. That's not what they said historically, and that's why I walked you through the 1994 manual and the manuals that precede where we're at today. So what I say to you is, all the cases the assessor is going to point you to have their origin they always quote these cases, the Richardson Building case and this National Trust Company case, which is 444 St. Mary. But what I say to you is, remember that what was being done in 444 St. Mary is not what was being done here. And then at page 27 in the lower right-hand corner, you come to the Richardson Building decision. And it's actually a little bit hard to tell in this case exactly what was going on. But if you go to page 28, the second paragraph from the bottom, considerable evidence was heard concerning the effect on value of tenant inducements. The respondent ultimately abandoned the position that value should be reduced to reflect tenant inducements. In the National Trust case, we can tell clearly that the argument being made is that the $12 rate should be reduced to 10, for example, in calculating gross potential income. We can't tell for sure what they were doing in this case, but again, I say to you simply, these cases are the foundational cases that the assessor will rely upon in all the cases that will be put before you. You gentlemen will know better than I that on many, many, many cases that have come before you in this cycle, sometimes expressly, sometimes not expressly, the owners have been granted the additional 5% allowance. There's a number of cases I've been involved in, 183 Kennedy, done on October 4th, I believe, a panel of Merritt, Boreski, and Buss. The next day, 1169 Sherwin Road, a panel of Linkletter, Buss, and Richard Whitebread, all granted that. I am hearing from the other owners' representatives that there are numerous decisions where the 5% has been expressly granted. And also there are many decisions, including all of the downtown Class A and Class B office buildings, where although the decisions did not say expressly 5%, the appellants got their value, their sought value, and by looking back at the calculation, one can see that it included a 5%. And then finally, tab 9, this is my analysis of what the values work out to, and I'm going to show you in the text in a moment what it is, but just so we understand what I did, is I took properties, I tried to use 3 years of financial statements. I listed in the left-hand column the various items that were listed in those financial statements, and I then did a calculation of what were these non-recoverable expenses as a percentage of base rent. And I did it 2 different ways, excluding tenant improvements. So on this one, for example, you can see that in 2017, there were $10,753 of expenses without tenant inducements. The base rent was $187,000, and that came to 6%. If I then included tenant improvements, which was $3,151, then it came to 7%. And I did this for this grouping of properties. And now let me take you back to the text of my submission. Page 7, the very last page before tab 1. What I did is I analyzed, there's the heading analysis, I analyzed 17 properties. The expenses range from 0.70 to 66%. And appreciate, they are going to vary significantly from cycle to cycle. You have a building that has a vacancy and fills it and incurs a big commission, obviously the number is going to jump up in that cycle. But what we know is that over time, buildings will turn over. There will always be commissions to be paid in buildings as they turn over. There will always be a roof to be done. There will always be a parking lot to be resurfaced. Those things will always happen. And so these expenses, which can be very, very large, and again, coming back to the example of the little strip mall in suburban Winnipeg, spending $85,000 over the last number of years and getting a 2% allowance of $8,500, which would be about $1,700, they're never gonna get it back. It's grossly inadequate for structural items, let alone commissions. So again, what I did, there's 17 properties, but if I remove the top 3 and the bottom 3 and left me 11 properties with a more concentrated range of 3.25 to 13.21%, and then 7 of the properties concentrated in the range of 4 to 8%. And I understand that other appellants' representatives have been providing similar analysis to you. I've seen the city's response, which in part is the handout that the assessor spoke about earlier. Again, they're not including leasing. So what I'm saying to you ultimately is, clearly I'm suggesting to you that a 2% allowance is inadequate to properly take into account the expenses that landlords incur that are not recoverable, and accordingly I will be asking you to make a 5% allowance additional to the 2% on all properties. Subject to questions, that's my submission on this. Now, I appreciate I'm in the presentation of my evidence now. I don't know if you want to stop and deal with this.
I think we'll stop and deal with this
Right.
expressly. So, questions for?
Next up is questions, okay, yeah, sure, just a few. So just to clarify, we went over it probably twice now, but the 5% you're asking for, which we've called management, you're just asking for a 7% non-recoverable expense now, or are you asking for, is that 5% management?
7% non-recoverable.
Okay, so, again, I've went over myself, I'm not gonna repeat questions that I've covered. The 1994 General Reassessment Manual, that was 25 years ago, correct?
Yep.
And we started doing multiple regression analysis in 2006, correct? That was our first cycle?
I'll accept that.
Okay. The market has, we can agree the market has changed in the last 25 years, correct? We're not,
Everything you've just said to me about starting multiple regression and the market changing in the sense of rents have gone up and vacancies gone down and capitalization rates have cycled up and down, all of that is true.
yes,
What hasn't changed one bit is landlords have expenses they cannot recover. That was the case in 1994, just as it's the case today.
okay.
So none of that has changed.
Okay, thank you. So, again, one of the major issues you went over in your submission is that you're including leasing commissions, you're including tenant inducements, you're including, capital costs in that 2% or your 7% are 2%. You used an example of a year where an owner makes $85,000 and they spend $85,000. Like any ownership of a house or a building, you would agree that an owner is planning to make these large expenses over time, and like you said, you can't pinpoint one year that has a high expense that the owner has to spend more money and then use that to increase the non-recoverable for that 1 year over, say, 25 years for a roof, correct?
Which is why, through the use of a 2% or a 5% or a 7%, effectively what you do is you amortize the ups and downs out of the process.
Yeah. And when
You effectively stabilize it by doing that.
Absolutely. And when you did yours, when you did your non-recoverable expense sheet workup, like the one I presented where, we're at that 1.04%, did you include do you have like an overall average for what yours worked out to, or do you have a
So,
sheet that shows the?
On page 7 of my text, what I explained is that if you take out the top 3 and the bottom 3, what you end up with is a range of 3.25 to 13.21, and that 7 of those properties are concentrated in the 4 to 8% range.
Okay, so 7 of the properties constitute the 4% range. So you'll agree that the range of 3.25% to 13.21 is a large range for non-recoverable expenses.
Okay.
And when you created your non-recoverable expense percentage, did you include potential income for the vacant space in the building? Or did you use just the actual reported rent for that year?
I
For each
use the
year?
actual reported rent.
Okay. And again, so one of our differences is when we look at our analysis, we put in market rent for that vacant space, that can change that percentage. If you had a lower base rent and a higher capital cost on a year, or a leasing commission, it's gonna change that percentage.
I'm gonna correct that,
Okay.
because the property manager's statements that I relied upon to do this, what they actually do is in the rent roll, they do assign a rent to vacant space, and then in their financial statement that comes with it, they show a rent amount, but they also show a vacancy amount in that section. And so the effect of that is that they're accounting for the vacant space as well, but then allowing for the vacancy as a reduction of that rent. So it is based on the potential.
So every mailer you used had market rent in for that vacant space?
Yes.
Okay, and our department has requested add the addresses for these properties, correct?
Mr. Pohl may have requested them from me.
Have you returned the addresses to us so we can
I have not.
have a look at these? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I believe that is all my questions, thank you.
Okay, Maurice, questions on the non-recoverables?
Well, I haven't got many, I guess, it's a bit complicated. Normally, appellants argue site-specific numbers. Now, we see that, and you know, on non-recoverables, they do vary a lot. One year, like you talked about the 85,000, but on structural, but you know, they do accumulate if nothing happens for 5 years. From 2 goes to, let's say you haven't used it, you go to 10, right? So, quite often in the figures here, although you did specifically talk about averages, because you're asking for 7, I think you mentioned between 3 1/4 and 8 was sort of a, I'm not sure I picked up everything.
Yeah, what I said was that I did 17 properties.
Yeah,
I took off the top 3 and the bottom 3. The 11 had a concentrated range of 3.25 to 13.21%. And then if I narrowed it further, 7 of those 11 are in the range of 48%.
okay. But even when you have those higher numbers, you don't ask for it. But the years that nothing happens, you still ask for it. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm back to my site-specific thing, because quite often appellants will use the city's parameters, like vacancy. They might say we'll use 5 and there's 0 vacancy. So I'm trying to understand fairness in how you assess a building.
And I think the answer to all of that is, and using the vacancy example you just gave, but I think it applies to the non-recoverables as well. The city's vacancy rates are set to reflect the market overall. And buildings through their life will go through phases where they have no vacancy. But they'll also go through phases where they have a more significant vacancy. And so the city's vacancy factors are stabilized to reflect what occurs over the life of a building in a general sense. Well, similarly with the non-recoverables. For 10 years, the roof is good, and then suddenly it's got to be replaced. And it costs a big whack of money when it's got to be replaced. So you haven't spent any money in the 10 years leading up to it. So you've got more money in your pocket as an owner, but now you've got to take a lot of money out of your pocket. So what the concept of the non-recoverable does is it effectively stabilizes those things that happen over time, all sorts of different things. The structural items, the parking lot, the roof, the sidewalk in the example I gave you, the roof on this building, structural repairs to the brickwork, it needs to be repointed at some point in its life. Leasing commissions. You know, you've got 100,000 square feet in this building. At, the assessor says $17 a square foot. That's $1,700,000 of revenue. 5% of $1,700,000 is $85,000. $85,000 of commission. 2% of $1,700,000 is, what is it, $35,000? It's gonna take you a long time to recapture, to get compensated for all of these expenses. So really, what we're talking about, and again, the city does the same thing conceptually. Their 2% is intended to reflect a stabilized reflection of what happens over time. You may not have any structural repairs in a given year, but you will eventually. You will need the parking lot, you will need the roof, you will have to pay leasing commissions. You know, every time a tenant leaves space, you have to clean up their space. Sometimes you have to demolish what's there. That costs money. So that's all it does, and I know you're concerned about site-specific but what I say to you is that these allowances are intended to reflect the economic life cycle of a building. And anybody who buys understands that there will be a life cycle to the building, and there'll be the up and down depending on when these things happen.
Okay, thank you.
Brent, any
Thank you.
questions?
I have no questions.
Okay, again, the question I asked the assessor there about the case law.
Yeah.
Those decisions were, seemed to be taken in the context of there being a 5% management. And I looked at these two, and these two specifically had that 5% in there. But I also don't see those cases actually considering what that 5% is for, other than a standard deduction. Can you elaborate on that?
I will, as best I can. So, so let's look at my tab 8, the National Trust case.
Okay, that's the first one.
Yeah. So, this decision, I believe, relates to the 1994 appeal. But if you look to page 4 of the decision,
Okay, yeah.
you can see the workup at the bottom of the page.
Includes the 5%, yeah.
And then, if you go to the next page, you see the 5% being allowed. They allowed an additional 3% reserve. They allowed the shortfall as well, and again, shortfall's got nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
So you can see that they allowed those expenses. When you go to the Richardson building case, if you go to page 29 in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that in setting the value, the board allowed the management of 5%, a 3% reserve, and the shortfall, and they then capitalized the 1990 income. But the point I'm making to you, and to be crystal clear on this, Mr. Hardman, is the position of the city is that there's case law in Manitoba that says that you should ignore leasing commissions. So about that, I say 2 things, maybe even 3. I say, first of all, each of you need to exercise your own independent decision-making process. These decisions of the municipal board, although they may provide guidance, they're not actually binding upon you in the sense that you are bound to follow them. You need to think about, how did these cases come forward? What was the context in which they were brought forward? What were the arguments that were being made? And how does that balance against appraisal theory and appraisal methodology? I think it is crystal clear from everything I've given you, from the Appraisal Institute, the textbook, Saskatchewan, Ontario, they all agree that you need to take non-recoverable expenses out. They all agree that structural and leasing commissions are types of non-recoverables that need to come out. The city says, now we've got these decisions from the board that say you shouldn't allow leasing commissions, for example. And I say, this Richardson building case, this National Trust 444 St. Mary, when you look at them, that's not the argument that was being made there. It was a different argument that was being made. Certainly in 444 St. Mary, the argument was, let's reduce the face rate, the gross potential rent, by the value of the inducements. So I think that all of the appraisal methodology is consistent with what we are suggesting. I think that going back to 1994, what the city called management fee back then, they did not intend to be purely a property management recovery from a third-party outside manager. They intended it to cover other expenses. And I know the assessor says he's got a rebuttal, and maybe I should wait for it. Are there cases in your rebuttal? Is the Garden City case on property management?
I can hand it out now. I just asked questions from it. If you want a copy, I can hand it out right now if you'd like.
Well, I know there's a case that the assessor has been putting forward called Garden Oaks. And in Garden Oaks, there was a decision by the board that essentially said, because the property management fee is recoverable, you shouldn't get it as a deduction, Mr. Landlord. That's what the case said. And yet, the city continued for 15 years after that decision to allow the 5% management. So I asked rhetorically of Mr. Pohl, how come the city allowed that 5% for 15 more years? And I suggested to him that the reason was because the 5% was not intended to cover only property management, it was intended to cover other things. So I think everything that you have before you in terms of proper appraisal methodology, proper valuation principles, the definition of value under the legislation, willing buyer, willing seller in the open market at the applicable reference date. Are any one of you, as a buyer of a property, going to ignore the fact that you may have to spend money on leasing commissions? Aren't you going to factor it into your analysis in some way? Because you're buying, the direct capitalization approach we use assumes that in perpetuity the property is owned. Well, these expenses will be there. So that's the best answer I can give you, Mr. Harden, maybe a little long-winded.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at page 25 there.
Yeah.
It says, the board is satisfied it is not proper to reduce value to reflect tenant inducement. So they're talking about reducing value and not reducing rent.
Well, but you see, that's the problem with loose words. Because again, you have to go back and read what the argument was. The argument was that he wanted the face rents, go back to page 24 at the bottom. Mr. Simmons' contention is the cost of these tenant inducements should be applied in reduction of the base rates in the leases. So if you reduce the base rates, you reduce the gross potential income, and by the time you work it through the formula, of course, the end result is a reduced net operating income and a lower value. So when the board says it's not proper to reduce value to reflect tenant inducements, no question, that's what they said. But what were the parties arguing? And remember that in this case, it's not about the 5%. The 5% is being allowed, as we see on page 26. So this fight is not about a non-recoverable. This fight is all about whether the gross potential rents should be reduced to take into account the inducements. It's a completely different thing than we're talking about here.
Yeah, we'll also note on page 25, it does say the board is also prepared to accept 5% deduction for management.
Right.
But
But what was management?
what was management, yeah.
And I say to you, when you look at the manuals of the city, management wasn't simply the fee paid to Colliers to manage the property. Management covered a variety of other expenses. That's what the 1994 manual says.
Okay, thank you. Now you have rebuttal you wish?
I actually just asked questions based on, if, save time instead of,
Okay,
Yeah,
so you don't want to present the rebuttal?
I asked all the questions that relate to my
Okay.
rebuttal, if that makes
Alright.
sense. It's just, it would be the exact same thing that I just asked in the question period.
What about the case law that you're referring to here?
If there's certain ones you want, I can handle the
Well,
rebuttal.
no,
in case.
I'm,
Well, it's your
I was just-
case to
Yeah.
make as you wish. so-
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I asked all the questions I was going to ask from the rebuttal in the question period, if that makes sense, and
Okay,
answered them.
that's fine.
So it would be the exact same questions again.
Where are we? How long will your presentation on value take?
10 minutes?
Okay, well, let's finish this case completely then before having a break. So you can proceed on to your evaluation.
Okay, so, let's start with the fact that the issues are the rental rate, the non-recoverable expense, and the capitalization rate. So, on the rental rate, the assessor's using $17 a square foot. The assessor classifies as a Class C. The comparables the assessor gives you, so, you know, again, at page 5 of the assessor's brief, his workup, you've got rents, you know, 4 of the 7 rents are in the $18, $19 range. There are no Class C buildings that are getting rents in the $18, $19 range. Even the Class B buildings aren't getting rents in the $18, $19 range. So, at tab 3 of my material, so here is a listing of OFC comparables that the city has generated. The average rent is $12.13, the median is $12, the weighted average is $12.80. A number of these buildings are actually in the Exchange District. If you look at comparables 26, 27, 32, 34, these are comparables in the Exchange District, 45, Rory Street. So these are all comparables in the Exchange District. So although it's classified as a C, the rents for a C are in the $12 range. But even the rents for a B have a weighted average of $14, a median of $14. We're at $17. We are at rents, again, looking at page 5 of the assessor's workup, 4 of the 7 spaces have rents starting with an $18 or a $19 a square foot. That is way high for this type of building in this type of location. In the end, I will show you my workup, but in the end, I am, in my view, more than generously using $15.55 a square foot, which is higher than, so I'll circle back to the end when I show you the value calculation. Non-recoverable expense, you've heard from me on that, but you've received a separate submission from me on that. And then I want to talk about capitalization rates for a moment. So this property gets a 6.9% capitalization rate. As the assessor noted in his evidence, the B buildings get 6.75. The building right next door, treated as an OFD at 93 Lombard, gets an 8.2. We're going to come to another building in a few moments on this docket that gets a 7.05. I don't really understand why if a B building in the downtown core connected to various amenities gets a 6.75, looking at this one and go to tab 5 of my materials. I've got a variety of cap rate information. The first page was the 2018 charts. The second page is the 2020 chart. It's the assessor's chart. They don't even list Class C buildings. Collier's notes that downtown Bs are 6.25 to 7.25. The city says that the downtown Bs are 6.75 at the 20th and 80th percentile. This building is getting a 15 basis point bump, 0.15%, considering its location, considering its age. I say to you, it's not enough. Turning the pages, you've got CBRE at page 4 in the lower right-hand corner, putting B buildings in the 6.5 to 7 range. This is a C, it should be higher. So what I'm saying to you ultimately is I think a capitalization rate of 7.25% would be appropriate, especially in light of the rent that I am utilizing. And so if we now go to page 6, you will see on my page 6, there's my calculation of value. I've used $15.55 a square foot. And to be crystal clear, it's being used because it's the amount we used. Tab 6, Mr. Harden.
Oh, tab 6, you said page 6.
I'm sorry, tab 6. So to be crystal clear, we're using the $15.55 only because it was the amount we used to resolve the 2018 appeal. It is still way high for a Class C building. But I've also moved the capitalization rate. I've used the 10.5%. I've also put the 5% back in, and that results in a value of $20,612,000, which, considering all that we've discussed, I think is more than reasonable for this property, and that's the value I'm asking for. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you. So I think you just answered, but just to clarify, the 2018 settlement was reached with me. I made an agreement at the board. As I said, the reason for that, this property was renovated and they did an addition, right? So there was a yearly, every assessment, we looked at the vacancy. There was shell space in the building, so they had to fill the tenants. After the renovation, they left it a shell so they could fill it to the tenants' needs. Every year there was a slight change in that shell space amount, which was a lump sum to lower the assessment, correct?
Yes.
So 2018, using your tab 2, you can see the workup. We removed 7,562 square feet of shell space for 491,000.
That's correct.
And so you're using the 15.55 rental rate because that's what the model rental rate was last time.
That's right.
Okay. And you don't believe the rents have gone up from 2016 April 1st to 2018 April 1st?
To be crystal clear, the rents were not $15.55 in 2018 for Class C space. They're not $15.55 today for Class C space. They're not even that for Class B space. For some reason, the model for this building is kicking out rents in the $18, $19 per square foot range when your own spreadsheets of comparables don't put the rents that high. We accepted 2018 as we did. The owner was prepared to accept that simply to resolve the matter. It was too high then, it's too high now, but I'm using it, but in conjunction with a change to the capitalization rate.
Okay, so you're saying the market is lower,
Yes.
you didn't look at the income received from the owner in this building and the expenses you didn't look at the semi or the gross rent? I look at the expenses?
I do, I look
Okay.
at all of that, but again, the rates in the leases take into account a whole variety of services that the landlord provides to tenants that typically are not provided.
Okay. So, would you agree that a building with an effective year of 2013 would garner higher rents than, say, a building with the average age of 1970?
There's no question they did a pile of work in this building. I'm not gonna suggest otherwise from them. Having said that, and I think you used the phrase earlier, the frame of the building is not 2013. The frame of the building is old style brick from the turn of the 20th century. What they've changed is the interior, and to make it more modern in terms of the mechanical systems. But having said that, it's still an old building from that perspective. It's not a modern building, and although you're calling it 2013, I'm not sure that's the case, but it is no better than all the downtown core office buildings that are Bs, which have an average rent of $14. It is no better than all the other Cs that have an average rent of $12. So in using the 1555, in my mind, I am being more than reasonable in this.
Okay, and for the comparables you're comparing to, the OFC rent comparables, did you put this comparable sheet together, or this?
No, this is the cities.
And what property was it being used to compare to?
183 Kennedy.
Kennedy. And 183 Kennedy, is that a similar to our subject property?
No, it's a smaller downtown office building, but having said that, the buildings listed, many of them are 8-story, 10-story, these are large buildings, like the subject. These are not, the 183 Kennedy was a small office building, give or take 9,000 square feet, but many of these buildings, if you look at this list, and it's tab 3 of my submission, you can see that the great majority of these buildings are north of 5 stories in height, 10, 8, 6. These are big buildings, so they're very comparable in terms of overall size to the subject.
Okay, thank you. And again, your last issue was capitalization rate.
Yeah.
Just a couple questions about that. This building itself, newly renovated, there's 5 tenants in the building, as you said, mostly government leases.
Yeah.
Government leases tend to be longer term, correct?
Yes.
Would that have an impact on how you look at the capitalization rate at all? Would you lower the capitalization rate if you had, say, 5 20-year tenants versus 5 5-year tenants?
I would, but typically when you get a 20-year tenant, you pay for it in terms of the rent. So you lose the opportunity to jump up in rent if the market moves. And in the context of this building, again, the structure of the leases means that the landlord is absorbing a lot of cost. But to be clear, part of the reason I moved the capitalization rate up is because I'm using an above market rent. And above market rent creates greater risk, and that's part of the reason I moved the cap rate up.
Okay, and I believe that is all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Maurice, questions?
No questions, thank you.
No questions. I had the question, but it slipped my mind, so obviously wasn't all that wise with the questions. I will. You want to do submission on this or on the?
I think I just covered it, yeah.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, good. We'll take a 10-minute break now.
Good, thank you.
Okay, we will resume. So we'll go on to 214 McDermott, and the issue is assessed value, so you can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The roll number for this one is 13060872000214 McDermott Avenue. This property is just west off of Main Street on McDermott. You can see on my page 2 exactly where it's located. And before I go any further, sorry, I just realized I do have a small recommendation on this property.
Okay.
I had 5 copies of it.
I think it's actually attached to the brief.
Oh, is it?
It's the very
Good, that's
last
helpful.
page.
Okay, good, mine just ripped off and I thought I didn't do that, alright. So if we turn to my last page quickly, I'll just explain the differences. The main issue was the leasable area we had on this property was 8,725. I have reduced that leasable area, as you can see, to 8,097. What I did was I kept the model rents in place for the floors. I took 628 square feet, it looks like, off of the third premise that was 2783, and now it is 2,155, which is, according to the lease, the actual leasable square footage. So that's the update. We kept all the parameters the same, and that lowered the value from 1.235 to 1,145, 1,145,000. So just, if you need to reference that last page for the income approach, that's what I'll be talking about for this appeal. And I will.
Before we go on,
Yes.
how do you feel about that number?
I feel it's a start.
So it's a more importantly, it's a continuation.
Yes. I was prepared to continue. So, again, so that changes the lease of area up to 8,000 square feet. This is another heritage building built in 1903, and then due to interior renovations, it has an effective year of 1977. Page 2 again, as you see the picture where it's off of Main Street. Small, slim building, 4 stories, long, narrow style floor plan. Has stairs and elevator. Page 3, you can see the front of it. So it has 2 doors on the main floor. The one on the right, you enter in, you go straight down, and there's actually like an elevator at the end of the hallway. And then to the left, there's a separate kind of room. You can see how it has the 2 doors on the front. The whole building is leased at 1 currently, and but just that's the way the floor plan is, and that's why there's 2 doors on the front of it. Page 4, you can see they've always requested for our request for information. They also sent in the 2017 Sales Questionnaire. The most recent sale of this property was June 23rd, 2017 for $1.5 million. Review showed an arm's length sale between 2 unrelated parties. I have included the questionnaire, which we can go over after. Page 5, which instead of using page 5, I'm gonna go to the last page, and I'll just talk about it from there, the updated income approach. But you see we have 3 premises, but 4 stories. So the 3rd and the 4th story are in one premise at 4242. That's 1207 a square foot. And then we have the 2nd floor at 1700, and the first floor at, we have the first floor at 1700 square feet, and then the 2nd floor at 2155. So this works out to a blended rate of $12.38 for this property. We have our standard OFC parameter of 10.5% for vacancy on this building, 2% expenses, $850 shortfall, a capitalization rate of 7.05%. Works out to that total value of $1,145,000. If you turn to my page 6, this is some OFC comparables of right in the downtown and exchange area. We have 39 of them with a total average of 1143, weighted average of 1199, and a median of 1150. Our market income is slightly above that at that 12. Let me make sure I say it right here. Keeps coming off at that 1238. Page 7 is just the old income stream. Ignore that. Use the last page. Page 8. Again, I won't spend too much time on this as we went over it last time, but for our chart, we have the OFA, OFB, OFS. OFBs, which we talked about last time. This is, again, we're at 7.05%. This is a smaller 4-story, what we have as an OFC for cap rate. It's determined from OFS, from my understanding. We have 7.05%. The OFBs are at 6.75. Our OFS ranges for cap rates are between 6.2 and 7.3. We're at the higher end up there at 7.05 on this one. Again, this is a heritage building that's been renovated. I'll move towards the lease at this point. The lease on this property, if you turn to my page 11, it shows the 1-year lease in place before the reference date was $14 a square foot for MMP Architects. And then before the reference date, there was another lease signed for $14 a square foot for 5 years. So the building has had no issues being leased. It is being leased at a market rent, a net rent of $14 a square foot, as you can see on page 11. And there is 0 vacant space because this building is being occupied for the whole space. Page 12, you can see their reported rent for the year and their expenses and their non-recoverable expenses. Page 13 is continued. Page 14, we move to the sales questionnaire that was sent in by the owner of the property. So when a property sells, we send out an income and expense mailer with a sales questionnaire. This helps, this is one step in determining if it's an arm's length sale and if it should be used for analysis. I won't go through it super in depth, but I'll start at number 1, is the consideration paid, shown above, correct, $1.5 million. When was the sale date, when was the date of the price agreed upon, March 7th, 2017, so that's about a year before our reference date. Was this sale an arm's length open market transaction? Yes. Number 4, were there any real estate included in the purchase? No. Was there an appraisal done? No. Is there a leaseback arrangement between vendor and purchaser? So yes, that $14 per square foot net for 1 year. So that lease I showed you for the 1 year that ended in 18 was a 1 year lease at $14. When this property was bought in March 7th, 2017, they knew this lease would be in place that I showed you on page 11 until June 15th, 2018. So that's what that is filled out for. So that's a slight, you know, you can consider that a motivation. You're buying a property, you know it's gonna be filled for the next year. We're at 1.2 million, the property was sold for 1.5. You know, the amount of that motivation, I can't really determine. But I just wanted to point that out. Is there a single lease covering any building? Yes, 8. 10 to a 12 is no. Property characteristics, what is the use of the property at the sale? An office. Is the intended use of the property the same? Yes. Condition is good. Do you intend to make major renovations? Yes. And they're going to do roof replacement, 50,000, timing to be determined. Did you intend to, or do you intend to demolish? No. And are you going to subdivide the property? No. Page 15 is the, I've blocked out the mortgage details as this cycle I've been, I guess, recommended to remove it for privacy issues, but I do look at it before, and it was just a standard mortgage, standard market rate mortgage, nothing of special. Total 1.5 million. Income and expense information just 31 to 33. Was part of this property tenant occupied at the time of sale? Yes. And was the purchaser price based on the property's net operating income? No. Were there any financial details or investment prospectus available? No. And then it was signed. Page 16 is just a picture of the floor plan, as you can see. So just what I explained, how there's 4 floors in the building. Mr. Newman and I walked through this one as to see kind of the quality of the inside and what the space was. I've included page 17 to show some pictures of the space inside. So you can see the quality of the office space. You know, it's a slightly renovated 1906 building that has office space, has like a kitchenette on each floor with sinks, open floor plan. It was vacant at the time, but like I said, there was a lease signed right after that $14 lease. A 5-year lease was signed before it was agreed upon before the reference date for a 5-year lease signed March 27th. So it was starting in June, 5-year lease for $14 a square foot. It is currently vacant, but the tenant that signed the lease is paying the rent. So they're trying to sublet it as of right now. And if you have any questions, let me know. I believe that is my presentation.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Just generally, again, with classification of properties. So this one is treated as an OFC.
Yes.
It's my understanding that many of what I'll call the smaller downtown office buildings are treated as OFS. Is that correct?
There are some downtown offices that are OFS and some that are OFC.
What determines whether it gets an OFS or an OFC?
Again, it's so OFS can go up to 3 stories. Is usually the main determining factor. It's 3 stories and under, like suburban office. That's what most commonly. That's one of the requirements for an OFS. And then this is a 4-story with 8,000 square foot. It could be an OFC. So OFSs are usually more recent, built like the 1906s. Again, like you said, OFD is very old, not renovated, like we said before. OFC, then OFB. So you can kind of, this is a 4-story, so it goes above our OFS. But again, it's built in 1906, which is common to be an OFD or an OFC.
So as you've noted, this property has a heritage designation.
Yes.
And that means there are restrictions in terms of changes that can be made?
Absolutely.
Does that impair value?
I don't have any evidence on does it change the value, but it could change the value for sure.
And I gather, because we just dealt with 111 Lombard, there's a range of capitalization rates that even OFCs get.
Absolutely.
And what determines that range?
The cap rates are determined by size of the building,
Yeah.
age of the building, and then location, layout. There's some.
And
Those are the main factors that drive a cap rate.
Okay. And as the size goes up, everything else being equal, the cap rate comes down?
The cap rate would usually, bigger the size, the cap rate would usually go up.
Right. So 111 Lombard, 124,000 square
Yep.
feet. 6.9% cap rate.
Yep.
Here we are with an 8,000 square foot building
Yep.
with a 7.05.
If they were both built in the same year, like effective years,
Yeah.
because that's important,
Yeah.
then all else being the same, they would be different. But when you have a 2013 effective year versus a 1977 effective year, there's some of the difference there, right? That's where that range can happen, which makes sense to me.
As you noted, it's a narrow building in terms of its size.
Yes, absolutely.
And then on page 5 of your brief, actually, let's go to page 19, I'm sorry, the revised.
Thank you.
So, as you noted, these are model rents, correct?
Yes.
And I'm gathering that the 4,242 square feet, which is the third and fourth floors combined,
Yes.
it gets a lower rate because
Yes.
it's a larger space.
Yeah, the economies of scale of that actual premise is causing, and because it's the third and fourth floor, the floors cause a lower rent most often.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Okay. Brent, any questions?
Is there an elevator in this building?
Yes, there is.
Oh, there is, okay. No further questions.
Maurice?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, I got a couple of questions. If you turn to your page 16, it looks like there's an elevator, but it only goes up as high as 3.
It goes all the way, we inspected this building.
We walked up.
We didn't get in, we took the elevator from the first to the second floor, and then we walked up the rest, but I'm fairly certain it goes to the top unless,
Well, it
what
says
are you looking at
level
here?
400, it doesn't seem to appear to.
Okay, yeah, so
show
it
that-
could be, yeah, you know what, I didn't actually like look at that because we walked up the last 2 flights, but that makes sense that the elevator maybe stops at 3 and it does not go up to 4. I would not disagree with that.
So 3 and 4 then would have to be rented as a unit. You really couldn't rent them separately without.
Yeah, like from my understanding is, yeah, it's, well, right now it's rented as the whole building.
Yeah.
I don't know what they'd do in the future after the 5-year lease is up, if they could split that up or what.
Yeah, that was gonna be my other question. Given that it's
That
one
makes
tenant,
sense.
should it not be?
That's probably, I'm assuming, maybe somebody's noticed that, and that's why that the third and the fourth floor are together in
Yeah.
the premise, yeah.
Should it not be one area of 125 feet, giving more economies of scale if it's one tenant?
Yeah, like, again, we have it represented as, like, right now, it's as if there's the first floor could be rented, second floor, and the third and
Yeah.
fourth floor, right? That's how it is. But right now, yeah, so that would, if you put them all together as one tenant, I'm sure that model rent would slightly change, slightly because it being one unit, right? But, yeah, this is how it's split up currently in our system, which is, yeah. Because from my understanding before, from what I look back, is I'm sure it's been multi-tenanted in the past, but I didn't see when it was last updated.
Possible. Okay, you can proceed, Mr.
Okay, so, first of all, I note that this is a heritage designated building, and on the first page of my materials, I quote excerpts from the bylaw. This building is a grade 2, and as a grade 2, the entire exterior of the building has to be preserved, and the interior has to be looked at as well. So my suggestion is that this creates limitations on the flexibility of an owner in terms of redesigning or reconfiguring the building to accommodate alternate uses. One of the issues I was raising was square footage. That's been addressed, so that's no longer an issue. You know, it's an interesting process where buildings, how they're classified, and are they a D, are they a C, are they a B? Are they an OFS? If it's 3 stories, it's an OFS, even if it's in downtown Winnipeg. If it's 4 stories, it becomes a C. I mean, again, this is an old building with a heritage designation, and of course, the relevance of the designation is that it changes the model vacancy, it changes the model capitalization rate. But let me focus on just a couple of things here. If this was a D, and I say this based on another property I've looked at, that was a D, I think the rent would have been $10.34 a square foot. Mr. Harden, you appropriately note that if this is treated as a single-tenant building, the end result is going to be the model will generate a lower rent than is presently being shown. We've got the non-recoverable expense issue here as well. And, you know, the capitalization rate, you know, my thought is that this thing, because of its heritage designation and because of the narrow footprint that it has, it limits ultimately the uses in some ways that can be made of the property. So ultimately, if you go to, it's part of tab 3 of my brief, I've got a calculation of value. I ended up using $11 a square foot. The assessors had a blended $12.38. I ended up using $11. I used the 10.5, I used the 850, I put in the 5%, and I increased the capitalization rate to be more consistent with a D-class building. And 93 Lombard was a D-class building at 8.2%, and that results in a value of $815,000. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Okay, questions?
Just a few. Okay, so for rent, you're using $10.34 a square foot, or sorry, let me just clarify here. $11. Okay. So when you're applying that rent of $11, did you look at the actual leases in place at the building, or the history of the rental rates in this building?
I was familiar with it and was familiar with the fact that, you know, because this was a sale and leaseback, and because the buyer's motivation clearly was not a function of the income being generated, I considered it less reliable from that perspective.
Okay. So the $14 lease was put in place before the building sold, correct?
Yes.
And then the owner bought it, noting on the sales questionnaire that he knew there was a $14 lease in place for a year. It was sold for $1.5 million. Did you investigate that $1.5 million sale a year before with the owner?
I did not.
Okay. Is a sale, an arm's length sale, usually a pretty good indicator of market value?
It's a good indication of what that buyer, what his motivation was, as you said in your evidence.
Okay.
It's hard to know sometimes what motivates people.
Okay. And did you speak to the owner about the lease, the 5-year lease that was signed after the 1-year lease that was signed March 28th?
That's what you're saying. My understanding is that that lease came later. So I didn't look into it because in my mind it was post-reference.
Okay. Well, I can assure that the lease was signed on the 28th of March, and it's a 5-year lease for $14 a square foot for the whole building.
Yeah.
When we inspected, the property was vacant, correct?
Yes,
And the current management company is trying to sublet the property.
my understanding.
Okay, so the owner still has a 5-year, $14 lease in place that is being paid, correct? Okay.
Hopefully.
For vacancy, quickly, you want a 10.5% vacancy. What is the actual vacancy in the building as of the reference date?
Today, there's no vacancy.
Okay,
At the reference date, there's no vacancy.
okay, thank you. And then for the capitalization rate, I do not believe I have any questions. Just give me a second here. That is all my questions, thank you.
Okay, and Maurice, any questions?
Well, maybe just one. On page 7, your median is $12, and on page, so on your workup anyway, you're using 11. So you're not following your comparables here. I think you did comment on that, but I'm just raising it.
So what I commented on was the fact that if you look at the list of comparables, so on page 6 of tab 3, which is actually the first page, if you look at the comparables in the Exchange District, so comparable 11, comparable 26, comparable 27, comparable 34, a variety of these comparables in that area, comparable 45. That's why I ended up going with the lower rate, because many of the other comparables are in what I'll call the central downtown core, bounded by Portage and Broadway and Memorial and Main Street. And this one isn't, and that's why I went to the lower rate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Brent?
No question.
And I have no questions. So 200 Waterfront Drive. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The roll number we're looking at now is 130960491100. Address 200 Waterfront Drive. The 2020 assessment is $8,001,000. If you look at my page 2, I've included some pictures of the property. We have a 4-story property built in 2001 at the corner of Waterfront and Lombard. This is 2 buildings over from the Bricks building we were speaking about before, so we are familiar with the area at this point. The gross floor area of this building is 45,123. The leasable area is 41,477. This includes a parkade that has 32 stalls, indoor parking. Page 2, you can see at the bottom the entrance of the parking garage on the right hand side there. Page 3, you can see some more pictures. This built to be at the corner building. You can see the National Bank sign at the top. You can see the entrance, one of the entrances there on Lombard Avenue on my bottom of page 3. Page 4 is just another aerial view of the building, so you can see the shape and how it is located. Page 5, the owner has always complied with our request for information, as shown at the top there. Page 6, we have the income approach to value for this property. So there are 2 income streams. The first one is for the office building. This is on page 6. We have a leasable area of 41,476 in this building. It's classified as an OFB, built in 2001. It has 5 premises that work out to a blended rate of $14.67. That works out to a potential rent of $608, $612. Our OFBs have a standard vacancy this cycle of 9%. We're using 2% non-recoverable expenses, shortfall of $11 for an OFB. Works out to a net operating income of $501,000, a cap rate of 6.75%, which is standard with all our OFBs this cycle. And that works out to a total value of $7,433,000. You turn to page 7, I've included a large list of OFB comparables across downtown. Again, this is at the end of Lombard, which is 1 block from Portage in Maine, outside of the central business district boundaries Mr. Newman has spoke to, but I have a list of OFB comparables, 71 of them, as we spoke to, they'll work out to a weighted average of $13.99 and a median of $14. I've also included at the bottom just one market beat from Cushman & Wakefield for the first quarter of 2018, which is near our reference date. You can see the second row is Class B CBD, so this is Class B within the central business district. There's 27 buildings according to Cushman & Wakefield, and just to speak to the differences between OFB, OFCs, you'll see every market report, whether it be Cushman & Wakefield, Colliers, Altus, there's a different square footage for OFBs because they, again, there's a difference in what is qualified as an OFB to an OFC in different areas. It is slightly subjective. So the Cushman & Wakefield has 27 buildings downtown as an OFB. You know, the overall vacancy rate is 8.4%, and then the overall average net rental rate is $15.31. If you go down one row to the Class C, which we've talked about on, you know, the last building, we had the smaller one, 4-story, we had as a Class C. You see there's 65 total buildings taken and accounted for, with a 5.9% vacancy rate and a lower rental income of $11.45. So again, we've spoken about it, but I just wanted to highlight there is obviously subjective differences in OFB versus OFC as we spoke to, and even the third party appraisers feel that way. Again, I believe this building, built in 2001, is more comparable to an OFD office space wise.
OFB, you said?
OFB, yeah, we have it classified as an OFB, so all the parameters are OFB. This was actually built in 2001, no old building renovated, but we have it as an OFB classification. So when it was put on the roll, it was put on as an OFB, so I used OFB comparables. If you turn to page 9, that is the parking structure. I just want to check one thing quick, if my memory serves me correctly. 1 second here. I believe, just to save time, I believe no issue is taken with the value of the parking structure. Okay, I'm just gonna, so we have that 568 as the parking structure in the building, no issue taken, I won't spend any time on it. Page 10 are comparables for the parking structure, and page 11 is the gross rents actually claimed in parking structures in the area. Page 12 is the combined workup of stream 1 and stream 2, so stream 1 is the parking, and stream 2 is the office portion. That's how you get that total of $8 million and 1,000. Page 13 is our capitalization rate. I have one over the OFB, but the second column is OFB. The city of Winnipeg is using 6.75 for OFB buildings. The third parties, such as Colliers, are using a range of 6.25 to 7.25. CBRE is using 6.5 to 7, and Cushman & Wakefield is using 6.25 to 6.75. Page 15, I've included the mailer. You can see the annual income received for this property. They received $928,000 in rental income on the left-hand side of page 15. So page 15 is what the owner is receiving, rental income, $928,000. They're receiving $3,000 for storage, $98,000 for parking. They are recovering, there are some of the semi-gross leases in the building where they are recovering some utility and maintenance recoveries and some of the property tax. The total income for this property is $1,149,000. If you remove the parking, you're looking at $1,050,000 in rental income. And then if you take off the expenses from their total income, you're looking at an NOI of they're reporting NOI in the middle after expenses of $677,000. Just to compare it to our income approach, our model gives a net operating income of the office portion is 501, or combined with the parking of 541,000. So we are, over 100,000 lower than the reported NOI on this property. You can see the leasable area on the right-hand side of page 15. There's 0 vacant space in this property, so it is fully occupied. And if you turn to page 7, you can see these leases. So National Bank Financial is the main tenant of this building, occupied floors 1, 3, and 4, and there's 2 other tenants on the second floor. These were the original lease was a long-term lease signed in 2007 until 2021. The second floor lease was signed from 16 to 2026, a 10-year lease, and then there's a 5-year lease on the second floor of the property. Again, these are semi-gross leases in place. On page 18, you can see there is reported tenant inducement of $201,060. When, we don't know when or where that was taking place, but it is listed on page 18 for your knowledge. And then it just says 3 and 4 is the tax participation or operating costs determined by base year, and it just says varies tenant to tenant. And then page 19 is a recent pictures of the building. You can see kind of the inside quality of the office from those pictures. If you have any questions on this property, please let me know.
Okay, I'm sure you have questions, Mr. Moon.
So again, as you've indicated, this building is located outside of the central business core, and it's located at the foot of Lombard. You described that as being 1 block from Portage and Main.
Yes.
You must have much longer legs than me, but be that as it may.
1.5 blocks if you count that one street on the left is a half block, sure.
Sure.
It's a normal block for me.
Okay. So, look at your page 6. These rents are model generated, and again, the 22,340 square feet is actually an amalgam of 2 floors, isn't it?
Yes.
And so the model's showing a lesser rate, whereas the other floors, or the other areas rather, are different floors. And again, economies of scale are assigning to them a higher rate because of the smaller square footages.
Yes.
And the 4,837 and the 2,741 square feet, those are both the main floor, correct?
Yes.
For National Bank.
Yes.
Which one was that?
The 4,837 and the 2,741 square feet.
Yeah, for a total of 6,000.
Why aren't they treated as a single unit?
It was the way it was put in. I didn't look into exactly
Okay.
why it was put in.
Because if it
But
were a
is-
single unit, then instead of the rent being $1,569 and $1,645, it might, for example, be more like the $1,533 for the 6,440 square feet.
Yes, depending how it's entered, it could slightly change due to economies of scale, I agree.
No 5% or no 7% non-recoverable, obviously, in this calculation.
No, in none of them today.
And as you've noted, because it's classified as an OFB, it gets the standard 6.75% cap.
Yes.
And so, if you then go to your page 7, so your page 7 is a list of OFB buildings, which again, generally speaking, are what I will call the central business district. In other words, bounded by Portage and Broadway, with the exception of, there's 57 and on are all at 530 Kenniston, so those are suburban.
Yes.
But if you leave, the first 56, if I can say it that way, are all in the area bounded by Broadway and Portage and Memorial and Main Street.
Absolutely.
And some of them are brand-new buildings. If you look at 26 and 27, 311 Portage, where you've got rents of $28.50 and $33. That's the new development at the corner of Portage and Donald, where the Alt Hotel is.
2 of them are, yes, 26 and 27 are new builds in 2015.
Right. And ultimately, and then some of the suburban ones, 58, 57 on, that's that single building at the corner of Grant and Kenniston, correct?
Yes, it is, yes.
Okay. And so all the buildings that are comparables, many of them are tied into the walkway system, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the comparables are connected directly to the walkway
So
system.
for example, comparables 5 through 9, 185 Carlton
Yes.
connected.
Yep.
175 Hardgrade connected.
Absolutely.
220 Portage connected, 240
Absolutely.
Graham connected, 330 Portage connected, 330 St. Mary connected. Those are all connected.
I do not disagree with you.
So the great majority are connected. In terms of the leases, so at the end of the day, your average rent or your blended rate is $14.67 a square foot, correct?
Yes.
And when I simply eyeball the list of comparables, there are some above that, I will acknowledge that. But again, because many of them are on the walkway system, well, you know what, I'll leave that for argument. And then again, in terms of capitalization rates, as you've noted, the B buildings, depending on who's reporting, go as high as 7.25% or 7%. The majority are at 6.75.
Yes, correct.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, Maurice, questions?
No, thank you.
No question.
Did I have anything? Nope, no questions. So you can proceed, Mr. Newman.
So, a couple of issues here. One is obviously the non-recoverable expense. You've heard me on that already, so you'll see my workup takes that into account. So two other issues, essentially, the rental rate and the capitalization rate. So this building is on the periphery of the exchange. The great majority of the assessor's comparables are walkway connected, and I'll suggest the rents, to some extent, certainly are reflecting that. At tab 3 of my materials, I have a collection of rents for various buildings that are classified as OFBs that are not walkway connected. And you can see that the rents are not getting to the level of $14.67. Many of these leases are done in the 13, 14, 15, 16 timeframe. So it's the same time frame as many of the assessors' leases are done. I think connection to the walkway makes a big difference. In my material, in addition to the listing of rents at tab 3, I've also highlighted a series of rents on page 2 of the text of various buildings, in addition to what's in tab 3. And you can see, for example, in 363 Broadway, which is located on the south side of Broadway at Kennedy, there's two leases rather, done in 2017 timeframe at $10.60 and $13 a square foot, 6,144 square feet. Is very similar to the square footage of some of the space in the subject property. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that the disadvantage of not being connected to the walkway is reflected in the rents. You see that in my material on page 2 of the text, and you see that in my material in tab 3, and you contrast that with the assessor's, again, model driven, but depending on the square footage, because it's smaller square footages, the model is deriving a higher rent, and yet the market doesn't seem to be, reflecting that. So I ask ultimately for an adjustment in the rent. I am asking for $13 a square foot in terms of the rent. In terms of capitalization rate, Again, because this is on the periphery, I've adjusted the rent somewhat to 7%, and ultimately, that generates a value of $5,932,000 at tab 5 for the office portion. And then to that needs to be added $568,000 for the parking lot. And so what you end up with is a value of $6,499,000. And you find that on my tab 3 at the bottom of the page, under the heading conclusion, sorry, on my page 3, not my tab 3, my page 3. So it's $5,932,000 for the building, plus $568,000 for the parking, for a total value of, let's call it $6,500,000, compared to the assessor's $7,433,000. So again, it's primarily, I think the assessor's rents are too high, and the comparables, because they have locational advantages, when you look at those that don't have the locational advantages, the rents come down. Those are my submissions.
Questions?
Just a couple. Okay, so just start at rent. Your comparables for not connected to the walkway. Sorry, I'm just gonna find them quickly. So these not attached to skywalk system on your tab 3. These are comparables taken from an assessor for the 2018 appeal cycle.
That's correct.
What building was it for?
I think it may have been 423 Main.
Okay. So the most recent lease on this comparable is 2016, correct?
Yes.
February 1st.
That's why on page 2 of the text of my material, I picked up some more recent leases.
And you said for my comparables, or most of mine are in that 14 to 16 range. I just took a peek at mine, and I have included numerous 2017 leases, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and some 2018. Okay. So would you time adjust those sales for the not walk-in ones at all?
No,
Keep them the same?
no, I think actually what's happening in the downtown Winnipeg office market is the rents are compressing because of the huge influx of square footage into the market.
Okay.
I think that's gonna trickle down into the various different classes of buildings.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. You're using, on your workup on the last page, a vacancy allowance of 9%, so you're using our standard vacancy on this building?
Yes.
Is there any vacancy in this building?
At, I think in April 1 of 18, there was not.
Yeah.
There had been in prior cycles, and that was part of the discussion in prior cycles.
Okay. My mailer in my brief shows there is a 0% vacancy as of the reference date. Okay, so you're using our shortfall of $11 for that vacant space. Again, you're including the management fee, I get that. Your total NOI works to $415,000. Have you compared that to the reported rental rate, reported net operating income of the owner?
Yes, but again, in this building, the landlord is responsible to provide all the janitorial. There's a variety of services because these leases were structured as gross or semi-gross leases.
So I've included the mailer, and you're saying those expenses aren't accounted for in the expenses? Like
No.
when they put $138,000 in maintenance and repair, those light bulbs aren't included in what they're reporting in the expenses?
Well, I don't have the detailed
Okay.
ledger, but I would expect they would be.
Okay, so it's pretty diligently filled out. You would agree that the total net operating income after expenses is reported from the owner for $677,000 for the reference year, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so your NOI of 415 is way below that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Here. And I believe that is all my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, Maurice, questions?
No questions, thank you.
No questions?
Questions? Okay, I have none, we're making good time. Do we need this one after this?
Not ours, no, we're okay.
We'll move on to 471 Portage. So you can proceed.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'll say the roll number quickly here. 471 Portage, roll number 1309613520. This is the Rice Financial Building on Main Street beside the University of Winnipeg.
Portage,
It is-
you mean?
Portage, sorry, what did I say? I've lost it. Yeah, off of Portage beside the University of Winnipeg. I will hand out a updated workup for me, from myself. There's some slight changes, this building's, I'll pass it, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. So this building, if you look at the middle of our page, there's 3 different income streams on this property due to 3 levels of exemptions, so, the first income stream is the 2020 there, the total assessed value of $7,944,000. That is T-taxable, so that's the office portion of the office building right at the corner on Portage there beside the University of Winnipeg. You'll see on my page 2, I have a picture. But I'm handing out, it's a slightly updated because this building is slowly being, I don't wanna say taken over, but a lot of it's being taken by the University of Winnipeg, University of Brandon. It's slowly becoming more of a higher exemption level of the third level where it's the grantable, and there's less of that being taxable. There's a small portion of the building that is exempt because it's the City of Winnipeg Parking Authority in there, and that's where you're getting these 3 splits from. Again, I'm gonna explain this best I can. I've handed out an updated income stream for all 3 of these streams. I did not realize until I looked at Mr. Newman's that, some more space had been taken over. So I've tried to reflect these income streams and liability just slightly updated. So we're going to, if you look at page 2 of my brief, page 3 of my brief, page 4 of my brief are pictures. This is a building, office building, also has the parkade, and then it used to be the bus depot on the main floor and basement, but that was taken over by the University of Winnipeg. So we're going to ignore my income approaches on page 6, 7, and 8. And we're gonna look at my new sheet that I've just handed out. Those are the 3 income streams on my new sheet. You can see, if you look at my new sheet, the first stream on the left is the 60T. I put it at the top above the areas, there's a 60T there. You can circle that just to know that's the taxable portion in the office building. The second column of, the second income stream is 41G. So this is that higher education grantable portion that is either occupied by the University of Brandon or the University of Winnipeg. And then the third income stream is that 40E. So that's the exempt portion of the income stream that is occupied by the City of Winnipeg Parking Authority. So you can see I've used the same parameters for all 3, and I've taken the same blended rates as the model for those spaces, and I've put them in that's why you see the 1015 for the same one, that's the blended rates for that income stream. The 836 is the blended rate for that income stream, and the 955 is the blended rate for that income stream. And that's, if you want to compare it to my actual one that I brought in my brief, you can, but they're slightly, I've just taken the blended rates of those streams. Again, our model, as we've talked about, is going to give different rates for different sizes of space within that income stream. I've just used the blended rate it worked out to across it all.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, of course.
To maybe help you deal with this?
Of course.
Just to understand as you hear the presentation. So I have a similar sheet like this, as does the assessor, because part of the difficulty with this property is allocating the square footage into the different classifications. So we've both gone through the same exercise, and you'll see that from me. The primary issue that you're going to have to deal with is the question of the rental rate, the question of the non-recoverable, and that's really it in
Okay.
terms of this space.
Okay.
And so I just have that in mind as you listen.
Okay. and I will try to stick mine to the rental rate of this property,
Yeah.
if we're not disagreeing with the rental rate on the parkade at all, or?
So on the parquet, the issue's not the NOI,
Okay.
the issue's the cap rate.
Okay, so argument on cap, and I'll try to stick it to the points here.
Yeah.
But again, I'm just taking the extra time explaining these, this is a little complicated, and again, I had to relook at it because of the change in space. So at the end of the day, I am making a recommendation at the end of the day. On my bottom left of my new sheet, you can see that all three stream total, I put 10,846,000. So that is the three streams here, the total assessed value that I'm recommending. The parking stream is what I put under there, the 5,126,000, and that workup is in my brief for that parkade. And then the total assessment, 15,972,000 at the bottom left of my new sheet. The original assessment was 16,098,000, so it's not a huge change at all, but this is the new one I'm in. And the main difference is some of that 60T, there's a portion of that 60T from my workup that has moved to the 41G. So there's that's where you'll see the small difference. And you can compare the leasable areas if you want. So just very quickly, page 7 of my original brief. Page 7 of my original brief is the original 60T portion that I brought in. It was 32,582. My new workup is 26,525. So there's a slight difference there that has moved from 60T to 41G. And you can take that difference across my next income stream. If you have any questions about it, I will explain it, but at the end of the day, we are in disagreement of the rental rates for this building.
And a little bit of square footage.
And a slight bit of square footage that Mr. Newman has a newer lease, and he'll explain that, but he is a slightly different in that 41G, but again, I'll just explain what I have in mind, and he can talk about his slight difference for that 41G because of a newer lease. So I'll just move on to my rental rates very quickly. So this Rice Financial Building we have as an OFC. It was built in 1964. It has an effective year of 1964. Our income streams are low on this one for the age of the building and the OFC and the rents historically obtained. So the best way to look at this, in my opinion, for the way I have presented it across the three, I have, there is office building, and then there is we'll call it the annex. It is the old bus depot, right? It is different than the office building. So one of our big issues comes across in that I'm using an $8.36 blended rate in my middle income stream there, and the 28,000 square feet, 202, let me just confirm. That 28,000 at the top, 202, is the annex, so that's the old bus station. And then there's basement underneath it of 16,056 square feet, so 836. So if we're looking at the blended rate, we're giving that same kind of annex space with the basement, we're giving it that blended rate of 836, along with the other office square footage and main floor space in that building. So the real question today is, in my opinion, is that 836 going to be fair for the basement space as well as the main space? I have included some basement leasable in my brief to just show some of the basement leasable space in the city. And yeah, so you'll have to look at the three different streams at those blended rates, and it's probably not the best way to present it, but it's kind of what I have to work with here. But yeah, so I'll just go to my comparables quickly of my actual brief. Page 9, OFC comparables. So again, I'm using OFC comparables across the city to find, is that $10.15 blended fair for the 60T office portion of the building? Is it also fair for the annex and basement space portion of the building? And that 40E is just the main floor and some small office space in the building as well. So you see this blended, the three blended rates. If you look at my page 9, we have OFC comparables across the city, different sizes, going for an average of $11.43, weighted average of $11.99, and a median of $11.50. This property has a blended rate ranging from $8.36 up to $10.15, and that's including that large basement space. Page 10 It's, again, I have put these together because they are the actual net basement leases we have in the city. They range from $6.60 up to $12. I know that this is a large space for basement, 28,000 square feet. These are smaller office spaces, but some of them are bi-level office. We go down the stairs, they have windows on the side. This is a different, different basement space than I am showing on my road. It's very tough to find net leasable basement space, so a decision has to be made on that. What is the basement space in this building going to be for such a large space? So, again, I'm not trying to directly relate this 26,000 of square foot office space basement to the annex basement in this building, but just to show you what actual office space basements are going for in the city, if that makes sense, on page 10. And there is a range. So for those income streams, this building is at a 15% vacancy. So this is higher than our standard OFC vacancy, but I am there is vacant space in the financial building, in the actual office building itself, and there's been some vacancy history in the building over the years, so that 15% vacancy was carried over to 2020, and it is to try to represent the vacant space in the building and the historical vacant space it has had. We are using the 2% shortfall across the board. We are using the the 2% non-recoverable expenses and the 850 shortfall across the board. We are capping the whole building at 815 for the 3 income streams for 8.15%. And you can see that the 3 income streams work out to a total of $10,846,000. If you look at my page 11, we're going to move on to the parkade portion. So I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but behind the building, beside the University of Winnipeg, there is a parkade. It is shown on my page 3 at the bottom. And you can see the back ramps going on page 4 and the surface parking. You can see kind of where the parkade is located in the building. There are 356 stalls in this parkade. We are not, the only disagreement is the cap rate, so I won't go over the NOI. The NOI is not in disagreement. We use a 7% cap rate overall for all parking rate structures. I do not have any direct parkade cap rate evidence in my brief, but our parkades across the board are at 7% for the 2020 cycle. I've included rental rates, but it's not in contention up to page 14. So page 16 is our cap rates chart. Just again, we're looking at an OFC, a classified building as an OFC today. I've went through this spiel in the last one, but our suburban A OFS is between 6.2 and 7.3, and our downtown B is always at 6.75. This is an OFC at 8.15. It's a large base, and it's at that higher cap rate, that 8.15% to try to represent the lower income received in the building, the vacancy space. That's what's kind of boosting up that cap rate up to 8.15. And I just want to make and the parkade is at 7%, so that brings the capitalization rate, the blended rate for the whole property, like together, just so you know, 7.78%. All right. And I have included, starting at page 18, I've included a mailer showing the expenses, revenue. Page 20 going forward is the updated, the 2017, all the tenants in the building, the tenant sheet, and that's where I used these actual in place to update to the spreadsheet you're seeing in front of you. And then, the total value of mine, $15,972,000. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know this is a disjointed presentation.
15 million, how much?
The total assessment, $15,972,000. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes. This looks like a really messy property, but actually, once you sort it through and lay it out into these different income streams, it actually gets a lot simpler. So, just your revised spreadsheet,
Yes,
and just to be clear, so the 60T space,
yes,
that's the taxable office space. You've got 26,525
Yes.
square feet. You and I have spoken, I've given you my revised
Yes.
spreadsheet. And at the end of the day, the difference there is going to be the, a little bit of square footage that's over on the university side. I'll come to that, but you're using a blended rate of $10.15 on all of the space. And the reality is the great majority of that space is presently vacant.
yes,
Okay. The University of Winnipeg, Brandon University space, as you've acknowledged, you're using a blended rate of $8.36. A big chunk of that space is in the basement, correct?
a big chunk of that is in the basement, yes.
Right. And you've got 101,155 square feet there, and I'll present something that will increase the square footage slightly in that area and decrease it a little bit in the taxable area.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the City of Winnipeg space, the 40E space, where we are in agreement on 17,677 square feet. And again, you've used a blended rate
Yes,
of $9.55.
yes,
There are leases, and some of that space is basement space as well.
yes.
Okay. So, and to your knowledge, what goes on in the basement space, generally speaking, is either Brandon University or the University of Winnipeg are using it for classroom purposes and the related activities.
From my understanding.
Right, okay. The additional 5% non-recoverable is not allowed through all this, and the parking structure is capitalized at a 7%. The building as a whole gets 8.15. The parking structure could not be sold separately, could it?
I'm unaware of.
It's not on a separate
It's
lot?
not on a separate roll. It's
No.
part of, yeah, it would be sold within that parcel unless there was some sort
So
of.
there's no way to sell it separately, I'm suggesting.
From
to
my
you.
understanding, no.
Right. Okay, those are my questions.
Okay, Brent, any questions?
Just one question. Well, actually, Mr. Newman had got my answer on the basement space. If you turn to page 4, are these outdoor stalls included in the parkade?
I do not believe so. Let me just look at my map here. I'm not 100% sure if those, I believe it's within it must be added to the parkade. It's within the roll number boundaries. We have it all as parkade space, but I'm not sure on those stalls that are outside. I'm not sure if it's included in that parkade or not.
So we don't know if the revenue is included in that.
The revenue, I'm not sure if it includes those services. I'm imagining it does, but I can't say for certain.
Okay, that was my question.
Maureen?
I have no questions. I think I picked up most of it, but I'll see what Mr. Newman has to say, and that'll help.
So I've got a handout as well.
No, just a minute, I haven't, yeah. I've
Oh,
got
sorry.
questions too.
Sorry.
I remember them this time. There's the hotel next door. Could the outdoor parking be used for the hotel, or is any of the parking spaces leased for the
There
hotel?
is, so that the parking is open to the public, on the parkade and everything. There is, one sec, I have a sheet here, I'll let you know. Answer it better. Okay, so there is hourly parking, daily parking there, as well as, monthly parking. So a portion of it is reserved to common tenants in the parkade, but it is a wait list. The actual amount, the split, I don't know. The actual rates of April 1st, 2018, there's a wait list, and then there's reserve parking from 7 to 6 and random reserve parking 24/7. So there's a range. But
Okay.
In-Park manages this lot, and again, there's a whole range of parking there. So I'm not sure, like the hotel
Okay, so-
guests could use it as public parking.
So there's not a spot that's reserved for hotel guests?
Not from my understanding. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know the proper answer.
And the basement space, is that the old space that used to go down in Grey Goose, used to have the parcel pickup down there?
Is it? I haven't been in there. I've been in the main floor of the bus, but not the basement.
Okay. Okay, thank you, that's it then, you can proceed.
So I've got, the assessor's gone. So I've got an additional handout. Thanks. And let me just walk you through it a little bit, and I'll explain where it's different than the assessors. So the extreme left-hand column reflects 24,089 square feet. And what that is the space that's leased to Extreme PETA, a tenant on the main floor at the front of the building. And then it's the balance of the spaces that were vacant at April 1 of 2018. The reason it is different than the assessor, who in his revised workup is at 26,525 square feet, is because if you look to my middle column, you'll see the very last item, University of Winnipeg 8th part, 2,409 square feet. That is a lease that commenced April 1 of 2018. And that's the difference between the assessor's square footage and my square footage. And what I've done, as you can see, is I've identified each of the spaces in terms of where they are and what they are. But that's the difference between the assessor and I in our square footages. So hopefully that makes it clearer for you now, once you look at it, what's happening. In a general sense, the assessors use blended rates across the board for all the space. So for the taxable space, he's used $10.15 a square foot. The reality is that Extreme PETA is paying $23.50. The rest of the space is vacant. I've used $8.50 for what I'll call the upper level spaces, the 4th, the 6th, and the 8th. And I've used $2.50 a square foot for what I call the closet of 157 square feet in the basement. And I'll explain that all to you. I should tell you that as part of my brief, there is a rent roll in which I have color-coded the spaces to make it easier to understand what's what. But everything that's in the rent roll is now reflected in this spreadsheet. But I will explain, but the issue is a lot of these leases are gross, and so that creates an issue ultimately is what the net should be, but I'll explain that to you as well. So when we then jump over to, or let me just finish with one thing. Why did I use $8.50 a square foot for the vacant upper floor taxable areas? Because the lease that was done to the University of Winnipeg at April 1 of 2018 was at $8.50 net. That's why I used the $8.50 for the vacant space in the taxable area of the building. That's where it comes from. But as you can see, there is a history of $8.50 rates, some higher, depending on when these things are done. So then if I move into the middle column, which is the designated higher education, and you can see I've made reference to that. So you've got the University of Winnipeg Annex, gross lease. That's the old bus depot area. It's a gross lease at $14.20 a square foot. I've put it at $6 net. This is not fancy space. This is, as I say, the old bus depot area. It's a lot of wide open space. At one time, there was a Garbanzo's Pizza there. It's gone. At one time, there was a Starbucks there. It's gone. I don't think things of what I'll call retail-related stuff is doing well there. So it's really become purely university space. And so I put that space at $6 net. There's University of Winnipeg basement space at 16,056 square feet. Again, it's on a gross lease at $14.20. I put it at $6. The shortfall is $8.50. So if I were simply subtracting the shortfall from the $14.20, I'd get $5.70. I've used $6. The assessor's got comparables. I assure you the assessor's comparables, which are pretty reasonable office buildings, are far superior to what is in this space. The assessor's comparables, and I didn't ask him questions about this, but You know, his basement comps, 865 Waverly, for example, is that brown brick building at the southwest corner of Waverly and Wilkes. KGS Engineering is in there, been there for a long time. 1483 Pembina, it's an office building just immediately south of Clarence. 1479 McGilvery, it's, Buffalo Place, so along McGilvery, that's a space that's used as an office building. So these spaces are all of higher quality, and the assessor fairly indicated that he wasn't trying to suggest that the space was comparable. But what I'm saying to you is, at the end of the day, in using $6 a square foot, I think I've been pretty reasonable, considering that this is classroom space in this basement by and large. Then we come to University of Winnipeg main floor, net at 9,556 square feet. So for the rest of these, I have generally used the net rents that are actually found in the lease. They're entered into at slightly different times. We can look at the rent roll in a moment, but I've used the actuals that are in place. My blended rate comes to $7.95 a square foot, and the assessor is at $8.36. So at the end of the day, we're about 41 cents a square foot apart on this. And I should mention that on the taxable space, my blended rate comes to $9.87 a square foot. $9.87, based on my square footage, and the assessor is at $10.15. So again, we're about 28 cents a square foot apart there, not that far apart. So continuing then in the middle column, we come to some more basement space. University of Brandon, 8,114 square feet. That was a $12.50 per square foot gross lease. I've put it at $6. If I took off the $8.50 shortfall, I'd be at $4. There's 834 square feet, was done at a gross rent of $10 a square foot. If you took off the $8.50, you'd be at $1.50. I've got it at $2.50. And then the Brandon University 6th floor part, $12, that's the actual lease. And then the part space, 2,409, in place at April 1 of 2018, that's the actual rent. Then the city space, again, by and large, it's the actual rents. 3 of them are net, 1 of them is a gross lease. So the basement, 4,446 square feet, is a gross lease at $8 a square foot. If I took off the shortfall, I'd be negative. I've put it at $4. And that's what's creating the differences in our blended rates. It's slightly different rates for slightly different spaces. But I think overall, it's quite reasonable. We've got the same vacancy, we've got the same shortfall. My calculation has the 5% non-recoverable as part of it. Again, you've got a bunch of gross leases here. Nobody's paying management. There's another good reason why there should be a higher rate. And it's the same capitalization rate. And my combined value for all this space is $9,563,384 compared to the assessor's $10,846,000. So we are, roughly, give or take, $1.3 million apart on the office areas of the building. Okay? Now, what you see here is actually a little bit different than what I had in my original brief. I've actually increased my value compared to my original brief because I brought up the rents on the basement space, which I originally was using $4, and I brought them up to $6. So this is actually a higher value than I was originally suggesting. The other thing that then becomes an issue is the parking structure. And as the assessor has noted, the capitalization rate is set at 7%. I can tell you on the last cycle, parking structures had a rate of 7.5%. This parking structure is not sellable separately from the rest of the property. In my view, therefore, it should not get a different cap rate. because it can't be sold on a different basis. It should get the same cap rate. I'm accepting the NOI, so at an 8.15 cap, and I should have written this down, so at the bottom I've got the handwriting. The 4,403,000 is the parking structure at 8.15. And that creates a total value of 13,966,000. And then on the right-hand side, the 5,126,000, together with the 9,563,000, results in value of 14,689,000. It's all about which cap rate you want to go with on that, and I'm suggesting you should go with the same cap rate as the building, because they are a single economic unit and would be sold on that basis. So, at the end of the day, and as I say, the rent roll I've got at the back, it identifies all the leases and it color codes them. I've highlighted in either, I guess, pink or yellow. The yellow is all of the university space, and the pink is the city of Winnipeg space. And again, all the rents that I have used are the actual rents in place at the applicable dates. There are certainly arguments to be made that there were big inducements paid to get some of these tenants in there. And if you look at the rent roll, you can actually see on the first page of the rent roll a listing of some of the inducements, a listing of the commissions, $82,000 in commissions for the university space, $20,000 in commissions for the Extreme Pita Booster Juice space, more commissions listed as you turn the pages, more inducements listed as you turn the pages. All of this goes to the adequacy of the 2% and the non-recoverable. But again, bottom line is that where there are actually net rents in place, I've used those. Where you've got gross rents in place, they've generally gone to $6, and that's what I've done. So that's how I've arrived at my values. Hopefully with the benefit of this, it's relatively straightforward for you now, and you're able to follow what at first blush is complicated, but hopefully less so now. Those are my suggestions.
Okay, questions, Mrs. Spacek?
Just very quickly, this, it's just really regarding parking. I won't ask any questions about the building. I think you laid it out pretty good. You're saying the parking lot's not saleable together with the building, that's why the parking structure should have the same cap as the building?
It's only saleable together.
Yeah,
with the
only
building,
sale together.
Not
So-
saleable
so-
on its own.
Would you agree that a investor wanting to buy this building would look at the income stream of the building and look at the income stream as the parking lot?
Would include the income
Yeah,
stream?
like it would look at the parking lot on its
Okay.
own, not necessarily just because it's beside the building. Like it's gonna have a parking lot's gonna have its own issues, the building's gonna have its own issues, correct?
Sure, I guess. I'm not sure what the question means, but okay.
Alright, sorry, maybe I can put this a different way. This building gets an 8.15% cap rate, size, age. It obviously has vacancy issues. So it's what I consider a higher cap rate for an OFC than what we've looked at today. My opinion is that parking lot shouldn't just be brought up to 8.15 because the building's having some issues. That parking lot's still it has public parking attached to it. It's gonna be, Impark's operating on its own as a separate, separate to the building. So I guess you disagree with me on that, correct?
Well, what I would say to you is that the business done in the parking lot, I would suggest to you is a function generally of the business done in the building and at the university. And somebody asked about the hotel. The hotel does have some stalls in the parking lot to be able to provide parking for its guests. So it's the activities on the site or immediately adjacent that create the demand for the parking. The casual parker can just as easily go to the Bay Parkade, which is diagonally across the street. But if you're coming into this building or into the university, this is the most proximate parking. That's why it generates the revenue it does. But having said that, as goes with the building goes the parking. You can't separate it.
Okay, thank you, that's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Maurice?
I'll just try to reconfirm. The city is asking for 5972, is that correct?
Yes.
You're asking for 13966 if the cap rate is changed on the structure, the
Yes.
parking structure, or
Yes.
14689 if there's no change.
Correct.
Okay, and also there's the gymnastic of moving the square footage from one to the other. That has to be taken into account,
Right.
right? And then obviously you raise the 5%.
Right.
Okay, that's about it? I'm trying to get the picture,
No, no,
bottom
no, no.
line.
And that's why I
Otherwise,
said to you, this thing
otherwise
looks,
we're all over the place.
this thing looks really messy when we started out,
Yeah.
but I think it boils itself down in many ways. And at the end of the day, as I indicated, the real difference is the assessors use a blended rate overall, but even converting those blended rates, mine to a blended rate, we're 28 cents apart on the taxable area. We're 41 cents apart on the university space, and we're 64 cents apart on the city of Winnipeg space. That's the difference at the end of the day.
I was just trying to get the
Yeah.
picture properly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No questions.
I guess, a couple of questions. We just did 200 Waterfront that had parking, and you accepted separate cap rates for the building, and so why not here?
It's a much smaller lot, the overall contribution to value is very different. The lot at 200 Waterfront, not that this necessarily makes a significant difference, it's underneath the building, so to speak, it's within the footprint of the building, I'll say it that way, whereas this one isn't. This is a much larger lot, and so from my perspective, on that basis, it really should have the same capitalization rate. The other thing, of course, is that the capitalization rate at 200 Waterfront is actually higher than the building capitalization rate.
Okay.
200 Waterfront is getting.
So you're not gonna argue too much, in other words. Okay. Secondly, on the vacancy now, I mean, you parties don't have an issue with it, so I can't see us doing anything with it, but, philosophically, I guess, the taxable area, yeah, it has a vacancy problem, but now the university area and the city area, should they have a lower vacancy because in the future, they should be doing better?
The only reason you're seeing this separation is because of the exemption status. That's the only reason you're seeing this separation. Otherwise, you wouldn't see this separation that you see before you. You'd see it treated essentially as one income stream. Parking structure would be separate, but the entire building would be one income stream. And at the end of the day, this property, and I've done this property for many years, it's got a long history of significant vacancy, much higher than it is now. But even, even at April 1 of 18, you're sitting with 20,000 square feet vacancy, and then in the building as a whole, that's bang on 15%. So what I'm saying to you ultimately is, it's only the peculiarity of the exemptions that's causing the separation.
Makes sense. All right, thank you for that. We still have 2 properties to do.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Well, I'm gonna suggest we take a half-hour lunch break. We got 2
Oh.
properties to
Okay.
finish.
Okay,
That's
fine with me.
So we try to get back, say, make it about 22:01. Has anybody got any problems with that?
Whatever you guys wanna do.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm, whatever you want, I'm good to keep going, or I'm good to take a short break and keep going. We seem to be moving along pretty quickly now, so,
You wanna
It's
keep
up to
going?
you.
I mean, if we want to take a few minutes, let's do that and just keep going and finish.
Okay, let's have a 10-minute break
Sure.
then, and we'll keep going. So we shall recommence with 275 Broadway, the Union Center. So you can commence.
Sounds good, Mr. Chair. Roll number 12093167500275 Broadway. This is on the north side of Broadway between Derry and Smith. As you can see on my second page, I've included an aerial photo to show you the location and some street view pictures on page 2 and 3. This is a 2020 value of $12,369,000. This is a 7-story building built in 1990. It has a gross floor area of 87,407 square feet and a leasable area of 68,602 square feet. There is 52 outdoor parking stalls on this roll number, and the parking lot is to the east side of the building. Again, all the way to page 4 is pictures. You can see the building, you can see the parking lot. Page 5, the owner has always complied with our request for information. Page 6, so what happened in this building was, on the main floor, there used to be 2,538 square feet of bank, and that was renovated and converted to restaurant. When it was put in the system, it was put in on its own income stream as a restaurant. So that's why there's one income stream on page 6, 2,538 square feet at $20 per square foot. This is using the restaurant parameters for this part of, for this main floor unit that is located, which has a restaurant in it. You know, restaurant vacant, it follows the leasable area, it has the vacancy of 3%, 2% expenses, 750 shortfall, and a 6.5% capitalization space. So that 2,538 square feet is valued at $736,000. And if you turn to my page 7, I've just included 5 restaurant comparables downtown to show the ranges that they are paying in restaurant rents. I have 5 restaurant rents ranging from 4,000 square feet to 17,000 square feet, and there's a rental range of $18.51 to $33 in the newest one, and those are leases going back from all the way to 2010 for 10 and 20 year leases up to more recent leases in 15 and 16, and those are 10 and 15 year leases. Now page 8 is where the brunt of the value of the building is. This is our normal office income stream for this OFB. This is the Union Building. It has 66,063 square feet of leasable space, and we have that at $13.13. Again, this is we have it as an OFB. This building was built in 1990. It follows the OFB parameters. We have a vacancy loss of 9% with OFBs, as we've seen before, shortfall of $11, capitalization rate at that 6.75, and that gives you the total office portion value of the building at $10,490,000. Page 9, I'm using the same OFB comparables, all 71 of them went for, with that median of $14. Our subject is at $13.13. Again, I've included over here 363 and 386 Broadway, which we have OFB comparables. These are buildings on Broadway, so this is comparables 43 up until 56. There's a rental range in these buildings from 1060 up to 16. So I just want to make sure I read the right one here. Up to $14.87. Our subject is at that 13.13 mark, but you can look at these other OFB comparables downtown. I've already went over the Cushman and Wakefield comparable list here. This building has a parking lot attributed on page 11, so we have an income stream for those 52 stalls at a net rate of $103.50. I just want to check one thing quick before I go into that. Give me one moment, please. So again, just I'll confirm with Mr. Newman before I speak about it. You're not saying it's right, but you're not disagreeing with, for the purposes, the NOI of the parking lot? Page 3. Just want to make
Right, I'm not conceding it's correct,
No,
but I'm prepared to use it.
use it, and then you're
Yes.
just disagreeing with parking lot, one economic unit, similar
Yes.
argument to our
Right.
last property.
Right.
Okay, so I won't go too much into the NOI, but we're using a 4.5% surface parking rate for the cap, and then Mr. Newman here, wants to carry the total over to the building, which is a cap rate of 7.25%. So this will be a similar argument to our last one. We have a standalone parking lot beside the building. This is a surface parking lot, and again, I've included comparables on page 12, but the rental rate is not in contention. Page 13 is the full workup of the three income streams together, giving us that 12,661 value. Page 14, our OFB comparables are at that 6.75% across the board. This one is at 6.75 as well. Page 16, income and expense mailer sent in by the owner. Got the wrong page here. Sorry. And then it continues on page through 18, 19, 20 is the rental rates. This is gross rents in the building. You can see the gross rents are on that 25.75 mark mainly. And if there are any questions about this building, please let me know. That is my presentation.
Any questions? Questions?
Page 6, the restaurant stream. So as the assessment originally issued, there was no restaurant stream included, correct?
Let me see, maybe I missed that.
Look at my tab 1.
Tab 1. So this change was made to, let me just compare these values really quickly and I'll be able to answer. So this one's 12,661 and the one, that one, no. Okay, so yeah, so Mr. Newman is correct. That restaurant change, what I printed here, went out after the assessment went out, so it was a change in our system. So the original, and just so I'm right here, Mark, the original assessment of this was, like I said, 12,369,
Right,
and I've presented with that restaurant of a 12,661.
right.
So I am fine with not including that restaurant portion that I presented. And the actual assessment that went out didn't have that parking lot portion. It's updated in our system. When I printed my brief, it has the updated income stream. That would be for, you know, we obviously didn't do a 15-1 for that small change, so next cycle it'll come in as a restaurant. But this was originally valued as that bank space on the main floor as office. So that's where the total value on Mark's tab 1 comes to that 12,369,000, which is the original value at the front of my page.
Okay.
And then I've included a restaurant income stream that would be kind of for that 2022 if it was kept the same. And that's why there's a different value on my page 13. So if this makes sense, I'm fine with the proper front page of mine, that 12,369,000. And as Mark said and pointed out, there is no restaurant income stream on the front page of his, on page 1 of his. And I hope that makes sense, but I'm sure Mark will explain it as well.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
But what's happened practically is, so let's look at your page 13.
Yes.
What's happened practically is that the office building value, which was originally 10,934,000, has come down to 10,490,000. The parking lot remains the same. The restaurant is now in at 736, and so the total becomes 12,661,000. But the reason it's higher is because the rent being used on the restaurant
Yeah,
is
it's
higher
different cap,
than.
and it's its own restaurant stream.
That's right.
Exactly. And I'm fine with what's on your first page there, and that's what I really would be presenting. It's just when that restaurant stream came up when I printed my brief, I'm making evidence for that and not comparing it. I missed the 2020 value that was sent out. Before that, what you wanna call a renovation or change was done.
Because in theory, what should have happened is a supplementary should have been issued.
Exactly, if there was a big enough change or like, whatever, that stuff would have went out,
Okay,
but,
so, and the only reason I'm raising this is because obviously, I addressed an assessment as it issued, which is tab 1 of my brief. And-
Which I agree with.
No, I
Yeah.
understand,
Okay,
and what's being presented here is different.
Yeah.
So, but let's just focus then on the parking lot and the OFB building,
Yes.
and let me address that. So, and let me just be clear with the panel. So you're essentially presenting the original assessment
I'm presenting what you have on page 2, yes.
and supporting that original assessment
Yes, with my OFB rentals.
with your
And then
OFB.
ignore the restaurant that was a bank,
Right.
and the change that happened during the,
Right.
after the assessment was sent out.
Okay,
So
so as long,
you're saying include the
Yeah.
restaurant area in with the OFB?
Yeah, exactly, that space,
Okay.
and that's how if I was doing this, I would do it that way, but this is how it was put in by someone, so again,
just so I just want to be clear on that, so I know what I'm addressing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
does that
All
make
right.
sense? Just think of that little
Yeah.
bit of restaurant space, there's OFB
Yeah.
space in the rest of the
That
building.
makes sense, okay. And so, but as you indicated, at the end of the day, the OFB space is $13 and, as it originally issued, $13.17.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, and with the 9% vacancy and the 2%, in other words, parameters for OFB space.
Parameters the same.
Okay, so let's look then at your page 9. And your page 9 is a listing of OFB buildings.
Yes,
Many of them, as we discussed before, are connected to the walkway system. So for example, comparables 15 through 20, 220 Portage connected. Comparables at 240 Graham is connected. 330 Portage is connected. 330 St. Mary is connected. Those are all connected, correct?
I agree with you.
Okay. And then you've got some suburban ones over on the next page. But the OFB drives a rent based on your comparables. But ultimately, what the model did is the model selected different rents for different square footages.
Yes,
And so if we look at your page 8, a big chunk of it is in at 1279, and then you've got some smaller spaces, again, because of economies of scale,
yes,
the rate is coming up.
yes.
Okay. So this is an OFB. Why isn't it an OFC?
Again, as we went through numerous times before today, it is subjective. It's based on size, age, layout of building. When this one was built, so this is a 1990 build, so it's newer than most of those 1970 to 79 standard downtown OFBs I've used. But when it was put in, and I do not disagree with it, it changes, it slightly changes the parameters that we spoke about, a slight change in vacancy, a slight change in shortfall, a slight change in cap rate, right? So those, no matter how you wanna look at it, we need to look at those three things and do they apply to this property? So, again, whoever put it in as OFB, you're arguing it's OFC, but,
So for example, 305 Broadway, so this building is on the corner of Portage and Smith,
yes,
northeast corner of Portage and Smith.
I agree with you.
305 Broadway, northeast corner,
Yeah.
Portage and Donald,
Yep,
one block over.
yep,
8 or 9 story building.
absolutely.
Starbucks on the main floor.
Yes, I know what building you're talking about.
Okay. Locationally, no real difference.
No,
Type of tenant that will be attracted, no real difference.
yes,
It's just a little bit different in terms of age.
absolutely, it's a 1972. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. 310 Broadway,
yes,
southwest corner,
yes,
Portage and Donald.
yes,
All the same attributes.
very similar, yes.
But one's a C and one's a B, and that changes everything in terms of cap rate and parameters.
Again, it's a slight change in vacancy.
Yeah.
A slight change in shortfall and
Yeah.
a slight change in cap. I agree with you.
Okay.
I do not disagree that it's subjective whether it's a B or a C, and you agree it's a C, I agree it's a B.
Okay. Parking lot cannot be sold on its own.
not as it is as of this moment, and it's one roll number, the parking lot and the building.
Yeah. Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Any raised questions?
Oh, you're looking at me? I was trying to recap the restaurant and the office. And I guess that gives us an income of potential rent. No, I added wrong.
If you look at, I might be able to quicker, if you look
Yeah,
at
do it quicker.
Mr. Newman's page one, or first tab,
Okay, I don't know what that is.
if you go to his first tab there, he has the original one that was sent out, you see the income OFB parking.
Okay,
So you're gonna have your potential income, you're gonna have your total leasable area in there, so you can see what was originally sent out. So that's having the restaurant
so
as
675 cap there.
Yes, OFB has
On
a
the
six
works.
point seven five cap, yeah,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
no problem.
I just want to make sure I got my words okay here.
Oh, of course.
Actually, before I move on, can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
The cap rate on the parking lot?
Yes.
4.5%.
Yes.
As I understand it, there's no transactional evidence to support that.
I did not create the cap rate. I don't have the evidence here.
Do you know that that's a decrease from a
5%.
higher cap rate last time?
I believe last cycle was 5% for surface parking, and now it's down to 4.5 this cycle.
Okay, thank you. I'm done, thank you.
No question.
No questions? So I have no questions, so you can proceed.
Okay, so, again, for me, the primary issue is the classification of the building, and what that leads to is the question of the rental rate. Again, we've got the 5% non-recoverable, and with classification of the building also comes a question of capitalization rate. If you look at, as the assessors pointed out, my tab 1 is the original assessment, and essentially a rate of $13.17 a square foot is being used for this space. If we go to my tab 2, you've got a set of OFC comparables. What I draw your attention to is that, and as I did through my cross-examination of the assessor, 310 Broadway, 305 Broadway, these are buildings built in the 70s, I acknowledge, but they are literally one block away. You know, you've got 2017, 2018 leases in these premises, and the rents are different. The average rent for the OFCs is $12.13, the median is $12. You know, the buildings on Broadway, depending on the premises, are seeing rents sometimes under 12, sometimes at 12, sometimes slightly over 12. At the end of the day, I've used a $12 per square foot rate. The subject building, the entire building is on gross leases. And so it, of course, it becomes complex to figure out what the nets are. And for that reason, I've gone to the process of looking to the market and looking to the OFCs, because again, locationally compared to the others, it's really no different. No access to the walkway. I've been in this building on a number of occasions. I don't really think, certainly, you know, a lot of the Class B buildings, they'll have a fair-sized lobby, they'll have security in the lobby, there'll be more building amenities in a lot of the B buildings, not all, but in a lot of them. This building doesn't have any of that. So at the end of the day, I've selected $12 a square foot. I've left intact the 9%, the $11. I'm looking for the 5% additional non-recoverable, of course. And on capitalization rate, because I view it as an OFC, but even if it's viewed as an OFB, because it's off the walkway system, it's on the periphery of the downtown, I think it should attract a higher capitalization rate. And so ultimately, I've selected 7.25%. And then you see at my tab number 4, my workup, which suggests a value of $8,672,000 for the building. Now, then we've got the parking lot, and my view on the parking lot that, again, the parking lot is not going to sell separate from the building. It's necessary for the operation of the building. And if we apply a 7.25 cap to the parking revenue of $64,584, then we end up with $890,000 of value for the parking lot. And on page 4 of the text of my brief, I combine the building value of $8,672,000 plus the $890,000 for the parking lot to a total of $9,563,000. And that's what I'm suggesting the overall value should be. Subject to questions, that's my submission.
Okay, questions?
Just regarding the parking lot is operated by Lombard, correct? So the office building offers tenant parking during the day?
It's a combination of tenant parking, there is some reserve parking, and I'm hesitating about what I'm about to say. The restaurant, as part of their arrangement, has some parking in that parking lot. Really, I think we should ignore that in light of the fact we're ignoring the restaurant. But there is tenant parking available, but primarily the lot is more generally available to people coming in and out of the building.
Okay. And you're in the same position that this surface parking lot beside the building should just be, the cap rate should be the same as the building itself?
Right,
Okay.
because it's a single economic unit.
I understand. But that's all my questions on this one.
Okay, Brent, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I was looking at your work up here on the last page, and I don't see the parking lot in there. Am I missing something?
No, so you're right, you don't, because if you go to page 4 of the text,
Page 4 of the text.
under the heading conclusion,
Okay,
you'll see there that I'm saying $9,563,000, which is the $8,672,000 for the building,
okay.
plus $890,000 for the parking lot, and the $890,000 for the parking lot is the assessor's NOI with a 7.25 cap.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just do some scribbling. Okay, thank you for that. Now we come to the last property, which is 294 Boardroom. So.
We're on 294 Portage.
Yep. Proceed.
Roll number 12093320000. This is a 2020 assessment of $11,566,294 Portage. I've included pictures on page 2. This is a 9-story office building right beside the Bell MTS Center. You can see connected to the skywalk. I've done an aerial view there so you can get an idea of where it is. As I said, this is a 12-story office building built in 1908. We have an effective year on it of 1930. It has a gross floor area of 165,000 with a leasable area of 119,000. And page 3 is another street view of the property. Page 4, the owner's always answered our request for information. As you can see at the top there, this property did have a sale on April 6th, 2018. It was for $11,432,500. A search was done on this property to confirm if it was any related parties or arm's length. The sales questionnaire was not filled out, but what returned was everything showed signs of an arm's length sale for the property right before, which was negotiated before the reference date, and then it went through land titles a few days after that, April 1st, 2016, or 2018. Page 6 is the income workup of this property. So this property has a lot of smaller units within the building, many floors. Our income approach breaks these all down, everything but the first premise. So the first premise, we have 12,981 square feet of substandard basement. I have included some pictures of this space. It is not used. In the past, it was, I believe, used as storage, but it has been at some time since then switched to substandard basements, which has a rent of $2.38. So what we're trying to show is there is utility in this space. It is not fully leasable or not being leased at the moment. There are pictures, it's drywalled off, it's kind of just mechanical room storage. I'll show you at the back of the brief, but we are applying a potential rent of $30,895 to that space. So that is something for the panel to think about, and one of the issues that will come up at this appeal. The rest of the property is, the rest of the income stream is just for the units within the building. So those break down in different very small unit sizes where you're getting rents up to $17, and then some of the larger, the 22,000 premise, which is about a quarter way down the page, is at $9.10. I will let you know that the blended rate for all 119,000 square feet is $9.61. If you take that $9.61, you get a total potential income. We are reducing, or we're taking off vacancy of 10.5%, which again is another issue with this one. I will say here that, I wrote it down. This property's vacancy history, 2014 it had 13.5% vacancy, 2015 it had 24% vacancy, 2006 it had 15.91% vacancy, and then 2017 reported was 20.05% vacancy. So you can see that it had a high history of vacancy, this building. We are using that model parameter of 10.5%, so again, raise the issue now, something to think about. I'm not trying to say this building has no vacancy, just take that as you will for the vacancy. It has suffered from vacancy. Shortfall at $8.50. Overall cap at 7.8%. And this is where you get the total value of $11,566,000. Again, I have provided OFC comparables downtown. After 39 of these comparables, you have an average of 1143, a weighted average of 1199, and a median of 1150. Our subject property is at $9.61 a square foot. Page 12 is the mailer for this property. You can see where I got that 20.05% reported from. From my understanding, because of the sale, some of the information in there is, I just want to make sure I say this correctly. So the present owner acquired the property April 1st, 2018. So the information was filled out the best they could, but they pointed out that the revenue and expenses are based on the completed 2016 information, so a year before 2017. And then they're providing the rent roll that was live as of 2017. So take that as you will, but whenever there's a sale, it's, the information is a little broken down because it's only for half the year. Page 14, so this property does have a gross and semi-gross leases, or is it just all gross rents? I believe it's all gross rents in place, but you can see on page 14 the range in gross rental rates. And then we have some base year operating costs and expenses from page 16, 17, 18. And then there's pictures of that basement space going forward on page 20. So you can see one of the difference here in they have a reported leasable area of 106,358, and so that is the difference between having that 12,000 square foot of substandard basement space. There's a difference there that we're at that 119. So again, that's where that difference in square footage comes from. And if you have any questions, that is my presentation.
Okay, Mr. Newman, questions?
So, just looking at your basement photos,
Yes.
as you've noted, it's treated as substandard. Photos are found on page 20 and 21. Have you any idea whether this space is actually legally occupiable?
I do not know if it's legally occupiable.
Okay. And as you've noted, there is a long history of vacancy on this property, going back to 2014. And
Yes,
certainly it's been above market vacancy for all of those years.
as I said.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, great, question?
And I think you said that this was a bona fide sale?
It was from doing a land title search, the vendor and purchaser, I could not find any relation, so that's as much, it looked like an arm's length sale to me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I just ask one question that I meant to ask that actually speaks to what you just did? The buyer,
Yes.
to your knowledge, do they own the properties on either side of this property?
I believe Canad Inn's, the owner is Canad Center downtown, they own the Met, they probably own other properties downtown.
Do they own the Radisson Hotel? Do you know that?
If, I don't know, but you know,
I know.
there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, Maurice, question?
Yeah, you said this was connected to the walkway?
Yes,
Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
So this used to be the Somerset building, right? Look at that.
yes, it is, has the
Yeah.
front on some, the Somerset on the front.
And they renamed it now. Does the gross area, does that deduct the area for the walkway that goes through the building, basically?
I'm not sure for this one where that 100, like from the 165,000 square feet to the 119 leasable. I'm not sure what is taken off exactly. I couldn't tell you if
Okay.
the walkway is taken off.
Many years ago, I actually heard an assessment appeal on the bridge between the two properties, and it appears on the title of the Somerset building. Is that still the case?
So I'm not aware, I know through, I've had some OFB appeals this cycle where the agent has argued the walkway is actually a negative to the building because they have to pay for a common area on it. So I'm not sure if that's associated with all buildings that have a walkway or are part of the underground, but that was one of the arguments made, but I don't have that information.
Okay. All right, thank you. So you can proceed.
I mean, a couple of issues, although ultimately you'll see in my calculation that we've used 119,000 square feet. I have some real concerns about whether that basement space is leasable. I've been there actually, and in fact, some of the pictures the assessor has are my pictures that I provided to the assessor because I was asked questions and so I was there and took the photos. It's quite beaten up down there. My brief actually has some additional photos at tab 2 of the basement area. And some of them are the same as what the assessors put in. But, you know, bluntly, I would have real concerns as to whether this is legally occupiable space in light of the conditions. Having said that, if this were an OFD, I think it would have a 14% vacancy. So at the end of the day, clearly in terms of the revenue the building is generating, you can see from the questionnaire, which is provided, that at tab 3, that it generated $717,000 of net operating income. Obviously, that's influenced by the vacancy, which was 20% in that year. As the assessor has noted, 15.9% in 16, 20% in 15, 13.14% in 14. So clearly in my submission to you, an adjustment should be made to the vacancy. And I'll show you in a moment that I've done that. I've increased the vacancy and I've actually given you a couple of alternate calculations. So I say to you in a general sense that I believe the gross potential income is overstated. Almost every lease, if not every lease in this building, is a gross lease or semi-gross lease. Very chopped up building. The model rents, of course, because the space is chopped up and it's smaller space, the principle of economies of scale is going to push out a higher rent per square foot. And if you look at the assessor's brief on page 5, you can see that there are some very high rental rates being pushed out. There's a space at 512 square feet that's got a rate of $17.17. Again, that'll be the model doing that. And the only reason the overall space comes to $9.61 is because of $2.38 for 12,000 square feet of basement space. So I think the overall, the rent is somewhat overstated, the vacancy is too low, it needs the 5% non-recoverable additional. And so now if we look at my tab 4, and what I've done is I've given you two calculations. I've given you one with a 15% vacancy, and I've given you one with a 20% vacancy, but let's be crystal clear on something. I've left the square footage at 119,000 square feet, and I've left the rent at $9.61 a square foot. From my perspective, those are significant concessions, because what's going on here is I would argue that the leasable area should be in the 106,000 square foot range, and that the rent should be lower. But the vacancy, I suggest to you, has to come up without question. The 5% non-recoverable has to be allowed. I've left the capitalization rate intact at 7.8%. The assessors made reference to the sale. Canad owns the adjacent Radisson Inn. Canad owns the adjacent Metropolitan Theater. There's a motivation for them which will not be typical to buyers of this property in buying this property. So although the sale was between arm's length parties, I can see that this buyer had a special motivation, and that changes the validity of the sale. So ultimately, I'm asking you for a value of $8,362,000 based on a 20% vacancy, but keeping in mind again that I've used the full square footage and I've used the assessor's rent. I easily could have reduced the square footage and changed the rent, still gone for the 15 or 20% vacancy, and the numbers would look very different. So overall, my submission to you is that my approach is reasonable, and I am indicating and requesting $8,362,000 based on the 20% vacancy. Thank you.
Questions?
I have no questions.
Okay, Maurice, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Brent?
Is this a heritage building?
Interesting that you ask. The city's trying to designate it right now.
Oh, okay.
There's a hearing next month. The hearing actually was to have happened in September. It was adjourned because there was a problem with the city's service of documents and notices. So it's been adjourned to November, and they are trying to designate it right now.
Thank you.
I guess I don't know if anything hinges on it, but operating a office building is kind of out of the normal business plan for Canadians. Any reflection on why they would choose to do it? Do they have plans for the building?
There are no specific plans, but they do have various commercial properties, some of which are office in nature. And for example, I think Mr. Harden, you sat on 930 Jefferson, which is an office building, Jefferson just west of McPhillips, where there's a Giant Tiger and a Value Village. Well, that's theirs, but there's an office building there as well, for example. They own some commercial properties that have retail in them. So an office building of this size is certainly not typical for what they do. But again, an opportunity presented itself with them owning the adjacent Radisson and them owning the adjacent Met. And so it motivated them to consider this opportunity. Time will tell if it was a good choice or not.
All right, thank you. I don't think anything hinged on that. And that concludes today's hearing, so thank you very much. And I must say that was probably one of the most coherent arguments that I've heard on the 5% by both parties. So, thank you for
Well,
that.
and, you know,
Yeah, turn it up.